How do you predict the future in the real estate industry? And the fact is that all you have to do is connect the dots. The future of the real estate industry and multiple listing services from a historical perspective. And what I'm going to do is go through and be able to talk about where the industry is going based on where the industry has been. And we start out with a quote. I don't know where this came from. First time I heard it was Jesse Jackson. Text without context is pretext. And what we want to do is lay out the text that you can put into your context. Where's the real estate industry going? What's changing? Why is it changing? How is it changing? And how will it affect you? Alvin Toffler in the book Power Shift talks about three sources of power. The three sources of power are violence, wealth, and information. Violence used as a source of power has a problem because if you use it too much, eventually you'll have destroyed what it is you're trying to exert that power over. So first one is violence. Second one is wealth. And we all know we're very wealthy people or institutions or companies that have a lot of power for no other reason than they have wealth. But the third source of power, and by far the best source of power, and really is the democratization of power, is information. And Alvin Toffler goes on to say that information is the currency of the 21st century, that information has value. Now, as we look at the real estate industry, we see that the real estate industry is really changing. And we're experiencing today the manifestation of the last 25 years of change in the real estate industry. We have rapid technological innovation. We have human engagement in a very big way, online and growing. We have generational differences with the baby boomers and the Gen Xers and the Gen Ys and the millennials, and it goes on. We have new concepts of ownership, and we'll talk about those new concepts of ownership and using real property. And homes are now being recognized as a viable asset class. So we have investors chasing after single-family homes and condos. And we're in the age of big data with massive computing power to process information like we've never processed it before. And so now, because of these items, what we're now seeing, or at least it's appearing to us as we're seeing rapid change in the real estate industry. Now, for all intents and purposes, we're talking about just 25 years. The technology has been in the real estate industry in a big way only for 25 years. 25 years ago, for most people, there was no internet. The World Wide Web really wasn't around, and the browser hadn't been commercialized. And this thing, which is now ubiquitous, it's everywhere. This is an amazing invention, and it brings all of us closer and closer together, and it wasn't around about 13 years ago. So lots of change taking place. And another thing to keep in mind is that there isn't science fiction anymore. Remember science fiction? Like a wristwatch you could talk into, or going to the moon, or going to another planet. There is no science fiction. Your wildest dream isn't wild enough. And I'm very fond of that statement because people have wild dreams, but what I got to tell you is your wildest dream isn't wild enough. And if we go back 25 years, we can see that the things that have happened in the last 25 years, we didn't dream about them 25 years ago. We knew change was coming, but we had no idea this thing was coming. And so your wildest dream is not wild enough. And when people talk to us about change in the real estate industry today, and they talk about the acceleration of change and the fact that the game's almost over, we're here to tell you that we're not even close to the end game yet. And so when you hear the doom and gloom and the fact that it's going to change and it's going to change overnight and it's an avalanche, and we hear that from all of our friends out there, from the Inmans of the world and the Risk Medias of the world and the leading RE, and they're all telling us this thing's coming down. It's the end if you're in real estate. And we're here to tell you it's not the end. Not yet. So some things never change in the real estate industry. And I throw this at you because I want you to know that some things just hang around forever. Back in 1993, the year I was president of the San Diego Association of Realtors, we were talking about board of choice. We were talking about public access to MLS, agency liabilities, independent contractor versus employees, losing the MLS to outside entities, and loss of MLS income for associations. We're talking about buyer brokerage and buyer broker compensation and alternative sources of revenue and increasing professionalism. And an association staff-driven versus volunteer-driven. and the dynamics of a changing leadership in association management. And then, of course, dealing with this mentality of, I want it all, I want it now, and I want it for nothing. And that's always been an issue in the real estate industry, dealing with people who want it all, want it now, and want it for nothing. And that syndrome has grown greatly in the last couple of years because of this thing. I can get anything I want almost immediately, and it's amazing. I love Amazon Prime. Want it all, want it now, want it for nothing. So change. Change is taking place. It's dramatic. And what we need to know in real estate is that the real estate industry has always been in a state of flux. And so when people hit us today with the word change and the fact that the real estate industry is changing and that you have to get used to the change, know this, it's always changing, it's always been changing, it's always in a state of flux, and it's going to continue to change moving forward. Now, the other day I was reading a magazine that I subscribe to. I've actually subscribed to this magazine for about 40 years, Naval Institute Proceedings. And on the cover was an aircraft carrier with the words, "Too big to sink." And as I stared at that, actually the night before I did this presentation the first time in Texas, I was staring at that magazine cover and it reminded me of the real estate industry. And it reminded me of the idea that maybe the real estate industry is too big to sink. Like an aircraft carrier, it's too big to sink. It's complex. There are many, many, many issues involved in the real estate industry. You look at an aircraft carrier, it's too big to sink. One of the reasons is that it's honeycombed inside and you can close off compartments, and so you can flood some compartments, but it doesn't necessarily spill over to the other compartments, so it doesn't sink just because it has a hole in the side. Now, an aircraft carrier is awful hard to stop. And so just to kind of review this with you, I think it's important because the real estate industry is kind of like this. If you want to stop an aircraft carrier, you want to stop a large naval vessel, it is a procedure. The person that's driving up on the bridge has to first decide that that's what they want to do to stop, and then they have to tell the people that are actually on the levers, they call it the engine order telegraph, on the EOT that they want to stop, and they'll give a command. They'll say, "All stop." Well, then the person on the engine order telegraph, they want to make sure that the communication took place, so they'll respond and they'll say, "All stop, aye, sir." And then they'll move that engine order telegraph to all stop. Now, down in the engine room, there are guys sitting around drinking coffee. Back in the old days, they're also smoking cigarettes. And they'll look up and they'll see the engine order telegraph go to all stop. Before they do anything, they'll answer so that they know. They'll move their engine order telegraph to all stop. And that tells the people on the bridge that they got the message to all stop. But that carrier's still moving forward. It's not stopping. It hadn't even begun to stop yet. Then those people down in the engine room, they close the head throttle. That's steam going to the turbines that's going to drive the ship. They have to close the steam turbines to the head, close the throttle to the head steam turbines. Now, once they close that throttle and there's no more steam going to that turbine, they open up. Now, remember, the aircraft carrier is still going forward. Then they open up the throttle to the astern turbines. And then it takes a while for the stern turbines to kick in and the propellers have to actually stop. Remember, the carrier's still moving forward. And then the propellers will start to go the other way. And it takes a while for the propellers to actually, we say, take a bite in the ocean and to start to slow that aircraft carrier down. So from the time the officer of the deck on the bridge said all stop to the time that carrier is stopped, it might be a mile or 2 miles down the road. And so the real estate industry, to me, is like an aircraft carrier. It's big. Now, that doesn't mean you can't sink an aircraft carrier. You can, but it's a lot of work. And you could sink the real estate industry, but it's a lot of work. So when people tell us about how this is going to be revolutionized, it's going to change overnight, keep in mind that it's going to take a while for that to take place. And that gives you some time to prepare. Now, talking about change in the real estate industry, there's always been change. Now, knowledge is power. Toffler said that. So we're going to go back and look at the history of change in the real estate industry. After World War II, when the veterans came home, we wanted to give them places to live, so we gave them great financing. Builders started building tracts of homes. Levittown comes to mind. And the American dream was starting to become a reality. And in the real estate brokerage industry, there was solidification of the power of the local real estate brokers. And those local brokers set up multiple offices around town. I'm from San Diego. We had a real estate broker past president of the National Association of Realtors, Art Leach, one of my real estate heroes. Art Leach at one time had 16 offices in San Diego. There was no franchise. There were the big brokers, and they had the power after World War II. And so no matter what city you traveled to, you would find large brokerage firms dominating the marketplace after World War II. And then in 1972, we had a franchise boom. So there really were no franchises in real estate prior to 1972. And in 1972, we had those you're familiar with them, the Century 21s, the red carpets, ERA, which is interesting. That was electronic real estate. They had a fax machine. But that was technology during that period of time. Coldwell Banker, RE/MAX. So we had this franchise boom starting in the 70s, and that kind of changed the complexion. And people were afraid that the old brokers would go out of business, but we saw that many of them stayed in business, and we had new competitors in the industry. We had the franchises. Now, what also happened in the 80s, we had aggregation of financial services, because around 1981, some of the big Wall Street firms decided that they wanted to get involved in the real estate marketplace. And so in 81, Sears bought Dean Witter, a stock brokerage house. And the idea was that the stock brokers could share leads with the real estate brokers. And so we had an aggregation of financial services. Now, in between there, in 83, we had this another new real estate brokerage firm, Keller Williams, come along. Change. Now, it didn't run everybody out of business. In 1985, Metropolitan Life purchased Century 21, a large insurance company purchasing a real estate company. Why? Aggregation of financial services. Great change in the real estate industry. In 1986, H&R Block, tax services, that's financial services, in Sears. And again, remember, Sears had purchased Dean Witter. And so we saw all of this coming together, massive change by the big players in the world, had a lot of money, and yet real estate continued to move forward. Then in 1987, we had Black Monday. Remember that? Stock market crashed. In 1989, Prudential purchased Merrill Lynch. And I failed to mention that Merrill Lynch got into the real estate business, a stock brokerage firm. So we had all of this change in the 80s with the financial services aggregation, and then Black Monday, and then these big companies decided they didn't want to be in the real estate space, and they started to divest. Now, when Prudential bought Merrill Lynch, they paid $300 million. And we're talking about in 1989. That's a lot of money today. That was a lot of money then. And they purchased 450 offices and 18,000 agents. So Prudential then, remember Prudential actually was the Rock, the insurance company. And again, it's this aggregation of financial services, and it was around for about 15 years one way or another. Change in the real estate industry is constant. Now, if we go back before 1993, we can see that real estate was pretty consistent for a long period of time. When I first got into the real estate business, we were using 3-ring binders, and we got updates to our 3-ring binders. They called them Errata. And we would go in, and sometimes we'd do pen and ink changes in our books. And then the new technology came out, and that was glue. And so they took the pages and they glued them together, and then they had books, and the books came out twice. Every 2 weeks we got a book. We got a book for single families, and then 2 weeks later we'd get a book for condos. So we had this alternating, we had these books, and these books had the inventory, and they were confidential, and we weren't supposed to give them away to anybody, and consumers weren't allowed to have them. And then every quarter we'd have what we called a comp book. So if we wanted to go back and look at prior sales, we could do so in a comp book. So none of this was digitized. And then around 1979, 78, 79, we got dumb terminals, where terminals tied into a major computer network, and we had thermal paper, and this was the start of the digital technologies in real estate in the 80s. Now, I was president in 1993 of the San Diego Association of Realtors. I throw this clip out there because it's very apparent, if you were paying attention at the time, that we were on the verge of something changing in the world. And I wasn't quite sure what it was, but I came up with this comment. I said, don't let the doom and gloomers get you down, because we were coming out of a recession. But I believe we were on the verge of the greatest social and economic explosion that the world had ever seen. This was in 1993. And what happened is about 1995, we started to see the dot-com bubble. And that's exactly what changed the world, changed economies, changed everything. Now, in 1993, in San Diego, we had somebody, his name was Richard Jansen, and Richard Jansen had this idea that you could put kiosks in Long's drugstores and people could shop for houses in drugstores. Now, we needed a contract with the MLS to do this, and so he went out and got a contract with our MLS in San Diego, and I was president of the Board of Realtors, and I thought this was a great idea to let consumers see what was available. Now, if you look at this brochure, at the bottom it says Home Select Kiosk, the automated 7-minute home finder. Now, a couple of thoughts. Number one, who goes to the drugstore to look for houses? I'm not really sure. And number two, who's going to spend 7 minutes looking at it? But this was state-of-the-art. This was technology. There were 50 of these things in drugstores around San Diego County because San Diego is a great place to experiment with new ideas. So this is what we had in 93. Now, also, in the early 90s, the National Association of Realtors was not sitting idly on their hands. They were looking at this. The MLS vendors in the real estate industry, they did a white paper. Arthur Young, a major accounting firm and consulting firm, they did a report for the National Association of Realtors. EDS, Electronic Data Systems, they did a report. Gallup did a report. And then the National Association of Realtors put together a presidential advisory group to look at all these reports and determine the future of the real estate industry. And this was in the early 1990s. So here's the MLS vendor white paper. Input to NAR business plan regarding the future of MLS, because we were concerned in the 90s about the future of MLS. And then the MLS technology, the Presidential Advisory Group, put out this report, The Future of MLS. And again, this was in the early 90s. And if you look at the charge, it says to assess the current trends in technology applications to real estate, especially as it extends to or includes MLS. Multiple listing service, information delivery systems, to make recommendations concerning what actions the realtor family should take to assure that it maintains control of MLS systems. And that was key. And if you look at the vision, that the realtor is the primary provider, distributor of all information needed by consumers in a real estate transaction. And this was the position that we took as an industry in the 90s. As the technology started to change, we decided we needed to take control of one of our most valuable assets, because nobody else had this asset, and that was the inventory of available properties for sale. And to keep the realtor central to the real estate transaction. Now this, again, a member services report put out by the National Association of Realtors. So it's very important to understand that your National Association was looking very hard at changes to the industry in the 90s and did some very bold things to move everybody forward. Now, the results of one of these studies, and you see that the study divided up realtors into 3 groups: established successes, young lions, and survivors. Now today we have the same thing. We don't have young lions anymore. I actually thought I was a young lion back in those days. But what we have today, we call them YPNs. We call them millennials, whatever, right? Well, we always had this distinction in the real estate industry of certain age groups of people, and this was the case in the 90s as well. And today it's the case. Now, in 1993, Billy Chi, another one of my real estate heroes, Billy Chi, who was with Prudential Locations in Hawaii, Billy Chi said famously, "The lion is coming over the hill, and realtors, you're like a bunch of chihuahuas arguing over the bones. And be careful, they're going to devour you." And so this was radical thinking, but at the end of Billy Chi's speech, he says, "Fellow realtors, let's become the lion. We're sitting in this position, we have the assets, we have the resources, and there's no reason that we should let the future be taken from us by outsiders." And so I'm here to tell you that NAR was right, and that you, realtors, were right about the technology, about the MLS, about the change, and about doing something about it. So the National Association of Realtors funded, as a wholly owned subsidiary, a separate corporation known as the Realtors Information Network, RIN, the Realtors Information Network. And it was set up as a separate corporation so it wouldn't get bogged down in the politics of associations. And so it was set up separately, had its own board of directors. They were funded $13 million to move this forward. Now, this is very interesting because at the time, there were only 20 million people using the web. Now, think about that. 20 million might sound like a big number. 20 million is nothing. There were only 20 million people using, this is an old slide, web economics, and you can see the economics was web traffic, eyeballs, ad placement, revenues. You know what? That's the same model that we use today to generate ad revenues on the internet. And we had browsers. As a matter of fact, the browsers were new. Netscape didn't go public till August 9th of 1995. Microsoft didn't even have a browser that people wanted to use back in those days. And we had many ways to search on the internet. We had Lycos and Yahoo and InfoSeek, different search engines. But the key point here is that there were only 20 million users. And one of our concerns was if we put something on the World Wide Web, who's going to find it? And that was a real concern with only 20 million users. We didn't know if there'd ever be more than 20 million users, but we assumed that there would be. And so part of the rewards of volunteer work, I was volunteered at my Association of Realtors, and in 1993 I was president, and I worked with the executive officer, Walt Bukowski. Walt Bukowski today is the executive officer of the San Francisco Association of Realtors. Walt was asked to participate on the first RIN board of directors, and because I was president, it was a great move forward for Walt. And I thought if we allowed our executive officer to go out there and talk to everybody about what was going on in the country, that we in San Diego would have an advantage. And so I encouraged our executive officer to go out and to participate on that board of directors, and he did. And I asked him, I said, Walt, someday they're going to need somebody to speak. They're going to need an evangelist. They're going to need somebody to go talk to realtors about this. And when they do, I'd like you to throw my hat in the ring. And that's exactly what Walt did. And in 1994, I was introduced to the people that were hired by the National Association of Realtors, by RIN, to work in this new entity. So I got my badge. I was hired by the National Association. We got these badges, right? No lions. Billy Chief said the lion's coming over the hill, and we're like a bunch of chihuahuas arguing over the bone. So we got badges that said no lions, and we were ready to take on the world. Now, I joined a team at that time at RIN. The team was Ed Evans, who was the president, John Schladweiler, who was in charge of the technology, Kathy Hartke's one of the brightest ladies I ever met, Jim Tebay, who was the vice president of field marketing, and the consultant at that time was a big company, Booz Allen Hamilton. So I joined this group of people. And they were not real estate people. They'd come from a company called Comdesco. They didn't know anything about real estate, and I'd been a broker for many years, and so they threw everything at me, and they said, Saul, tell us how this technology is going to be used in the real estate business. So on March 4th, 1995, it's actually the day after my birthday, I did a presentation to all of the MLS executives in the country at the Drake Hotel in Chicago, where we talked about the future of MLS, of the association, of technology, and what the Realtors Information Network was going to do for technology and for realtors. Now, one of the people that we hired at RIN was a fellow named Bob Goldberg. Now, this is actually an old picture of Bob Goldberg. You might recognize Bob. He's the current Chief Executive Officer of the National Association of Realtors. Well, when they hired him at RIN, he had to have somebody explain to him what was going on, what were these projects, and the only person that really knew deeply about what was going on was me. So Bob got assigned to me for training, so for mentorship, for something. I'm glad to say that he's now running the National Association of Realtors. And so Bob's job was to go out and find out how we could effectively market to the real estate industry. And so a RIN Network Desktop was created. And so this was, you see, a RIN Network Desktop, release 1A. This is what it looked like. This is how we loaded it. Remember these little floppy disks? It took 3 of them, but the first rendition of this took like 15 disks that you had to load on your computer. So you could then have access to a proprietary network. Now remember, we're talking about all of this was developed in 1995 for realtors, and what the realtor family determined was what we really needed was a proprietary network, a closed network. As a matter of fact, people are talking about closed networks today. But we knew in 1995 we needed a closed network. So this was the original RIN Network Desktop. And you can see that there were many choices that realtors who applied and used this system had. First, intro, kind of tell you about it. Mail, that was a closed system. It wasn't like the kind of email we have today. It was closed email. As a matter of fact, you send an email, if you wanted to bring it back, you could actually bring it back, because until somebody opened it, they hadn't seen it. There was an area called Discuss, which my business partners, John Riley, Mike Barnett, and myself were in charge of. We were in charge of that button. And that button was the community button, where we established the first online communities in real estate. And then there was a library, and that connected to the National Association of Realtors library and journal and news, because we had group subscriptions to the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times and those sorts of things. And then something called geodata that I'm going to come back to. And you could do shopping online. And this was all in a closed network, or a lookup, which was like a search. And then there was this thing called home ads, and we're going to get to home ads, but what exactly was that? And then there was a button, because remember, this was a proprietary network. You could click on that button and it would take you out to the web, right? Take you outside of that network. Now, if you remember, how did we connect to the internet in those days? It was through telephone lines. You had to find a telephone line. You had to plug a telephone line into your computer. Now, you had to make sure that telephone line was hot. I used to lick the line. If it shocked my tongue, I knew it was good, and I would plug it into my computer, and then I could dial up. And you see, if I wanted to hang up, I have to click the button that says hang up, because it was all done over telephone lines. So this is the RIN network desktop. The idea was to be able to handle everything you need to handle online in a closed environment. Now, I'll go back to that button, geodata, because that button, geodata, that was accumulating as much data as possible, and this is what geodata looked like. And you can see that RIN was about connecting all of these databases: crime, environment, thematic, taxes and deeds and school data, community data, foreclosure, demographics, reverse directories. Remember those? Now, those are all databases. RIN was going to hook all those up, and we called it geodata. And if you look at this, you might recognize that we have something today called RPR. And RPR is just the evolution of the original concept of geodata from the Realtors Information Network, from RIN. Now, also, the Realtors Information Network created something called DXM, Data Exchange Method, a data dictionary. Now, here was the problem. Every MLS in the country had different vendors, and those vendors didn't all speak the same language. And so if somebody wanted to bring all that data together, you couldn't. If a software developer wanted to develop something like Top Producer, which was the first big real estate CRM, it would have to be developed separately for each MLS, because each language was different, and that made it costly for realtors. So if we could somehow normalize that data, then we could have better software, less expensive software. It was the right thing to do. The way we were going to do it was something called DXM, or a data dictionary. And of course, RIN kind of fell off the table in 1996. And when RPR decided a couple years ago that they wanted to figure out how to bring this together, you know the methodology that they determined was the best way to do this? A data dictionary. And so, again, the things that we created back in the 90s are still applicable and in use today. Now, here's another button, Discuss. We made Discuss. We actually gave it a name, and in later versions it didn't say Discuss, it said Real Talk. And Real Talk was the first online real estate community, because we realized, as our consultants realized back in the early 90s, that community was going to be essential to the success of online networks. And John Riley and Mike Barnett and I had already developed online communities, and so because we had already done that, we were chosen to develop the online communities for the National Association of Realtors. Now, there's another one of those buttons, home ads. Home ads was really about listings on the internet. And so when Richard Jansen showed us the kiosks in San Diego, and then he introduced us to the web and what was happening, we had this idea that maybe the listing should be displayed on the World Wide Web. And so the first listing program was called the National Electronic Advertising Program. I named it because there wasn't any name for advertising on the internet at the time. And I wanted to make sure people understood it was advertising, that it wasn't public access to the multiple listing service, that we were just talking about advertising. So we called it National Electronic Advertising Program, later reduced to RPA. That's Real Property Ads. And so the Real Property Ads were Realtor.com. Now, Realtor.com was owned by the National Association of Realtors at the time. So remember, the Realtors Information Network, funded by the National Association of Realtors, it had two distinct sections. It had this proprietary network, the RIN network desktop, and then it had ads on the internet, Realtor.com. Now, an interesting story about Realtor.com. We all know that the National Association of Realtors is very careful about protecting its trademark, about protecting the term realtor. Nobody thought you could use the term realtor in a web address at the time. We're sitting in a meeting one day, and we were talking about what should we name this new website that's going to have all these listings on it. And Walt Pakowski said, let's name it Realtor.com. Somebody said, we can't call it Realtor.com because that would violate NAR's provision in using the realtor term. Walt said, let's call Lori Janik, who was the general counsel of the National Association of Realtors at the time, called Lori. Lori said, yeah, you can use it. And so that became the name of the website where all the listings were going to go. And again, that was owned by the National Association of Realtors. Realtor.com was wholly owned by RIN, and RIN was wholly owned by the National Association of Realtors. And that's the start of why every realtor should be advertising on the internet. No, nobody was advertising on the internet. But we had to convince people. We had to socialize this idea that people would actually go there and look at listings. But remember, let's go back to that previous slide where we said there are only 20 million people on the internet. We weren't convinced that people were going to be able to find it unless we put it all in one place. Now, around 1995, Bill Gates released this book called The Road Ahead. We were all waiting for this book to be published. The Road Ahead, 1995, because we were building this for realtors, and then Bill put this book out, and here's what it said. This is critical. Bill Gates said in 1995, if you put your house on the market, you'll be able to describe it fully. 1995, fully, and include photographs, video, floor plans, tax records, utility and repair bills, that's connecting databases, 1995, and even a little mood music. The chances that a potential buyer for your house will see your ad are improved because the information highway, that's what we call the World Wide Web, the information highway will make it easy for anyone to look it up. This is Bill Gates in his book in 1995. He then goes on to say, the whole system of real estate agencies and commissions may be changed by the principals, that's the buyer and the seller, having direct access to so much information. Run ahead to platforms and today, and what's the purpose of a platform today? To bring the people together, bring the producer and the consumer together. So he says the whole system in 1995, the whole system of real estate agencies and commissions may be changed by the principals having direct access to so much information. Well, I admired Bill Gates. I thought the guy was amazingly brilliant, and when he said this, it kind of scared me for the real estate industry. He went on to say, at first, online classifieds won't be very attractive because not many people will be using them. Remember, there's only 20 million people. But then word of mouth by a few satisfied customers will entice more and more users to the service. There will be a positive feedback loop created as more sellers attract more buyers, and vice versa. Positive feedback loop. When a critical mass is achieved, which may only be a year or two after the services first offered. Now, it took a lot more than a year or two. He missed the timing on that, but he wasn't far off. The Information Highway's classified advertising service will be transformed from a curiosity to the primary way sellers and buyers get together. And isn't that the way it is today? When a critical mass is achieved, which might only be a year or two after the service is first offered, the Information Highway's classified advertising service, that's Realtor.com, Zillow, Troya, today, that's what we'd say, will be transformed from a curiosity to the primary way sellers and buyers get together, and that's exactly what happened. So I had to create the slides to convince realtors, number one, that there was this thing called the internet, that there was a piece of the internet called the World Wide Web, and that everybody was going to use it someday. And that we needed as realtors to start looking at this for advertising. So, of course, they turned to the only realtor on the team, which was me, and they said, Saul, you need to put something together because we need to socialize this idea. These are the original slides. If you don't like the color, that's the way it goes because that's the way I built this thing. I wasn't as good on PowerPoint back then. And so the first thing I said is, what is internet advertising? I had to explain. People didn't know what it was. They didn't even know what the internet was. And here's what I said. It's an inexpensive new medium. I know you don't know what the internet is. I know you haven't heard of it. But let me tell you, it's an inexpensive new medium. And it is currently accessible by 20 million people. The population of the United States, what, 300 million? It exists now. It's already there. We're not talking about something that's out in the future. It exists now, and it is the wave of the future. This is what we said in 1995. And then we went on to say, in what form does it currently exist? Okay, it exists, but in what form? We said, well, and this was a concern. There are 4,000 real estate sites on the web. If you went to Yahoo and you did a search for real estate sites, you got 4,000. Now today you get a couple million. But back then we thought 4,000 sites, and each site had maybe one or two listings. And we thought, that's terrible. If you go to a site and you only see one or two listings, as a consumer, you're not going to go back and you're going to say, no, I'm not going to go to the internet to look at real estate because there's only one or two listings. I got to go to 4,000 sites to find all these things. And so this was a problem, that we had listings spread out across many different websites. Each site had few listings. And here was an interesting point. While there were 4,000 websites that day we looked, just 9 months before that we had looked, and there were less than 200. So the websites had grown from 200 to 4,000 in 9 months. And so we were sure that this was going to continue to grow. So we have Realtor.com. We got the idea for Realtor.com. We got the idea to put listings on the internet. All we needed were listings because we had the technology. Remember that kiosk slide that I showed? Well, the fellow, Rich Jensen, that created the kiosk, he had the technology, and he's the one that wanted to put the listings on the World Wide Web. And so he came to Walt and I, and he said, look, let's put listings on the World Wide Web. And we thought, well, first you got to do it somewhere. You got to get them up on the web so people can see it. And so Walt and I went back to Chicago, and we talked to the staff at the Realtors Information Network with this idea about putting listings on the internet. And everybody loved the idea. And they said, but somebody's got to go out and convince multiple listing services and realtors that they should put their listings on the internet. Because remember, one of the fears at the time was public access to MLS. And so I said, I'd be glad to go out and talk to realtors about putting their listings on the internet, but I know the first question they're going to ask me, they're going to say, who else is doing it? Because nobody wants to be first. And so I asked Richard, I said, Richard, who's going to do this first? He says, well, I've already got permission to display electronically, I'm doing it on my kiosks, the listings from the multiple listing service in San Diego. I got permission to display electronically, and nobody's defined electronically. I think the internet is electronic. And so I'm going to take these listings in San Diego and I'm going to put them on the internet. And so Saul, you go ahead and book your appointments to talk to other MLSs, and when they ask you who else is doing this, you can say San Diego. Now, of course, San Diego didn't really know that, and the realtors in San Diego didn't really know that, and they didn't have to pay anything for that. Richard was doing this gratis because it was a beta. And my first appointment to go out and talk about it was in Austin, Texas. And I went to Austin, Texas. David Foster was the executive officer, and Bill Stansbury was the president. And I was a trial run for me. At least I thought it was a trial run because I hadn't done this. And I put my slide presentation, black and white, acetate overheads, to explain to people what the World Wide Web was and what the internet was and how listings were going to go there and how they were going to get ads and how they were going to get leads from this. And they were going to get traffic directed back to them. And then they asked me to leave the room, and I left the room, and then they asked me to come back about 15 minutes later, and they said, fine. Now, it wasn't going to be free. It was going to cost $2 per listing per month. Austin, the first association, they were going to have to pay $2 a listing per month. Now, the idea was agents would pay, brokers would pay $2 a listing per month. The Austin Association, so progressive and so forward-looking, they said, this is so important that we, the Austin MLS, we're going to pay the $2 a listing a month so all of our brokers and agents can have their listings on this new site, Realtor.com. So the first contract, they called me back in. They said, Saul, we're ready. We'll sign the contract. I didn't have a contract. So what good salesman goes to sales meetings without a contract? And I'll say, one, who wasn't confident he was going to get a deal, and we hadn't put the contract together. But we put the contract together. The first one to agree to pay us and to go up on the internet was the Austin Association of Realtors. They were the real pioneers. And the theme was exclusivity. Remember, there were only 20 million people on the web. If listings were appearing all over the place, we didn't think people would find them on the site that we thought was the right site, the realtor-friendly site. So we said, look, we're going to take all the listings in the country. We're going to put them on one site. Kind of like the Super Bowl. The NFL doesn't put the Super Bowl on 15 different channels. They put the Super Bowl on one channel. Everybody learned to watch the Super Bowl on one channel. And now they charge something like $5 million for 30-second ad spots on the Super Bowl. And we believe that everybody wants to shop for homes. Everybody loves homes. If we put the listings in one place on a site we own, we'll put it up there. It'll be exclusive. People will be driven there. All the leads will go back to the listing agents. As a matter of fact, what we were afraid of was that buyer brokers, and that was a new kind of thing at the time, would kind of complain that the only ones getting exposure were the listing agents. That's who we were afraid of back then. We thought we would have a political issue. And so we started to go out and get contracts from MLSs and put those listings up. And the idea, again, was that it be exclusive and not spread out all over the internet. And so the first portals were Realtor.com, and then Home Seekers was another portal. They started up in Orange County, and they were getting listings. And Cyber Homes, that was actually created by one of the MLS vendors. And Home Advisor, that was actually created by Microsoft. That was Bill Gates' entry into this space. And Homes.com, and these were the first generation listing portals. And that we were working with Realtor.com, and we were pushing for, don't put your listings on these other sites, put them on Realtor.com, because then we'll train people to find the listings on Realtor.com. And this was the first Realtor.com website. Attractive. Home search, broker agent services, other services, community information. So there is a look at the first site. So little review here, 1995-96. So in 1995, RIN, the Realtors Information Network, gave birth to Realtor.com, listings on the internet, all owned by the National Association of Realtors. We got direct data from every MLS in the United States. And when I say we, I was on that first team. My job was to go out and sign up, and Austin was my first one, but before I was done, I had about 500,000 listings, and we got that team out to 4 people. Actually, Carl Demuse, Roy Rainey, Derry Davidson, and myself. We became the 4 people that went and completed and got the rest of the listings in the country and put them up on Realtor.com. Now, there was realtor politics. There's always realtor politics. California had something called the California Living Network. Florida had something called the Florida Living Network. The states were working on their own thing. And I can tell you, some of the states didn't like the idea that the National Association of Realtors, in their mind, was getting into their space. And so we had lots of chatter and lots of talk. And then we had some actions by the president of the Realtors Information Network. You might remember the name, Ed Evans, that were not something that he should have been engaged in, and he ended up getting relieved. The directors of NAR became concerned because we had spent $13 million to launch Realtor.com and to launch the RIN Network desktop, and they were afraid that no association could keep up with the spending, that we couldn't compete in that world. And so in August of that year, 1996, the directors were called, and there's how many NAR directors? 1,000? They were called to Chicago at the Hyatt Hotel to talk about what they were going to do with the Realtors Information Network, with Realtor.com, and basically how they were going to close it down. So on August 26th, and all of you folks out there that think that NAR sold out, what you have to know is that there was a process here, and then on August 26th, there was a special meeting of the NAR Board of Directors. Those are realtors, practicing realtors, who got together and decided that they should collapse RIN and spin off Realtor.com because it was too much of a financial risk. So that wasn't NAR that decided that. That was the Board of Directors that decided it was in realtors' best interest not to have the financial risks. And so they spun that off. And Richard knew enough people to put together investment groups where it eventually went public. There was an IPO. an initial public offering of Realtor.com, and that means that anybody could buy stock and own it. It was publicly traded. Now, all realtors were offered 100 shares at the go public price. The go public price was $20 a share. We all could buy 100 shares at $20 a share. When, of course, when it went public, you could go in and buy it at any price, but within a couple months, the price was up to $150 a share. Now, it was up to $150 a share because the president was doing some things, and the financial people were doing some things called round tripping, and they're really not held in high regard by the Security and Exchange Commission. And so people actually went to jail over this, and the stock price plummeted. Much to the dismay of John Riley, myself, and Mike Barnett, because we had $9 options with a 10-year life. And had we been able to hold them longer than 10 years, we would have made some money. But it dropped. The price went back down and went below $9. It stayed there. Realtor.com had some financial issues. So it was August 26th, 1996, that the realtors themselves decided to spin off Realtor.com. Realtor.com then gave birth to this public offering. It was called Home Store, and Home Store later changed its name to Move. Now, Realtor.com became the flagship of Move, and there was a 1,000-page document, an operating agreement, that did give NAR some control over the way listings and certain terms were displayed. And it exists today. Now, 1996 to 2001, now remember, I was with Realtor.com and with the National Association of Realtors, and in 1996, when that whole thing collapsed, what I knew is that there was nobody online. That there were only 20 million people online, and that people had to go online and they had to learn about the web, and they had to learn about email because nobody was using email. And I thought I was fanatical about this. I thought this was a miracle, that you could bring all the people in the world, all the information in the world is available at the push of a button, at the speed of light, that this was an incredible thing, and people just didn't realize it yet. And so we actually changed the name of our company because we knew we had to go out and talk to people, but people didn't want to listen to us, so we figured we had to be crusaders about this, that we needed to go out there and be fanatical about the internet and the World Wide Web and where it was going. And so we changed the name of our company to Internet Crusade. And we went out across the country teaching people how to go online, how to use the internet. And I know it's hard to believe today, but that was the environment that we lived in at the time. We created this website called Realtown. It's still there. If you get a chance, go to realtown.com. We started selling domains and email. We still do that. Go to myrealtown.com if you get a chance, because we've been doing this longer than anybody else in the industry. And we had this idea about content in context. People that can then share and collaborate, and they'll create a culture and a community. And that's exactly what we see happening today. But we had this idea back in the 90s, and so we were out on the road preaching the gospel of the internet. There's that picture of Bob Goldberg, 2001, 2000. Oh, I know why that's there. And so in 2001, the National Association of Realtors, they had created a course the year before called ePro. And it was to teach realtors about technology. And that program wasn't set up the way it should have been set up, and the company that was delivering the services to the National Association of Realtors went bankrupt. And so NAR looked around, Bob Goldberg looked around, he said, who can I turn to that understands realtors, that understands training? And Bob and I had worked together at RIN, so Bob called me. And he said, can you help us? Can you put together a course? Can you help us with ePro? Can you go back and service the 4,000 people that we've already sold this course to? And so within a 3-month period of time, my partners and I put together a course called ePro for realtors, and over 9 years, we enrolled over 70,000 people in that course to teach them how to use email, how to use websites, all about all these things that were important. As a matter of fact, we're going to take that course material and we're going to make it available on Realtown very shortly. So if you go to the Realtown site, take a look for that old ePro course material. I think you'll find it very interesting. So we got that ePro contract. That allowed us to go out and continue to talk to realtors about technology in the space. Now, in about 2005, what happened is we got the second generation of portals. Now, some of the first generation survived. Realtor.com was a first-generational portal. It survived. As a matter of fact, Realtor.com was the first site to do syndication, distribution. Realtor.com was syndicating to America Online before we ever used the word syndication to describe the distribution of listings. And then Zillow in the early 2000s, Zillow popped up, and Zillow was about voyeurism. Zillow knew that people, actually Zillow has done a great job. Zillow knew that people like to look at houses and that they didn't necessarily like to buy them, but they like to look at them. And they knew that eyeballs were important on the web. And so Zillow came up with the idea of telling people what their homes are worth, showing people different kinds of houses they would never buy. But remember, it's voyeurism. What's called real estate on the web became like porn, right? Where people would go just to look at this stuff and eyeballs. And then Trulia used a little different approach. Trulia used the search engine optimization. And Trulia was very successful, later purchased by Zillow. Homes.com, they're still around. They were one of the originals. They survived. Now, then what happened was all of these entities started to charge fees for the leads generated. They monetized the traffic to the listings by selling it back into the industry. And so here's what happened. Realtor.com, remember I went to Austin, I got the listings, and Realtor.com was going to charge $2 a listing per month. But in 1996, when we launched Realtor.com, and the listings started to go out on the site, actually before Microsoft decided that the way it would compete, remember Microsoft had a website called Home Advisor. Microsoft decided that the way it would compete, it would charge nothing. And so before we were able to charge any money to Austin, Home Advisor came out and said, we'll do it for free. Of course, realtors love free. And so the concepts that we laid out there and the dangers that we laid out there, free superseded all of it. And so nobody listened. And they all decided they would just put their listings anywhere. And we warned them, just think about this. The first Realtor.com model was, we're going to take your listings, we're going to put them on the web. We're not going to put pictures of your competitors around your listing, because we're going to monetize this by charging you $2 a listing a month. We don't have to sell leads. And we're not going to put your competitors' pictures up, and any lead that comes from your listing, you're going to get the lead. How many of you would pay $2 a listing per month to Zillow today to eliminate the pictures of all of your competitors and to have every lead that looks at your listing on Zillow come directly to you for $2 a listing a month? And that's rhetorical, because everybody that sells real estate today would do that, because Zillow, everybody goes to Zillow. And our model initially, that's what it called for. But when free jumped into the marketplace, it destroyed the other business models. And in fact, that was part of what led the board of directors to decide to sell and to let Realtor.com go and to close RIN down. Because how do you make any money if what you're doing is free? Well, what happens is people figure out how to make money, and they figured it out. They're going to sell leads back to agents. How many of you hate paying for your leads? Particularly hate paying for the leads that come off of the data that you put up there. Well, it's because you jumped to free. And then free led to paying for leads on the internet. So around 2007, syndication became a big thing. In 2008, January of 2008, I took a position as the chief executive officer of a company called Point 2 Technologies. And we were going to build a syndication engine. Now, what is a syndication engine? You've heard of syndication. It's distribution of listing data. And so we look at all these different MLSs. If you look at that diagram, Netris and Link and Lbar.com and SRA, those are multiple listing services. Now, remember, they all speak different languages. And so if you were going to draw data from all of those different sources, they all come in different languages. Now remember, there are people that want to receive all that data on the other side, like Zillow and Trulia and Yahoo and Realtor.com. They want to take that data and they want to display it, but they don't want to have to take that data and interpret it all. So there was a need for somebody to create a process that would, we call it, normalize the data, put it in one language, so that it can then be distributed to anybody who wants to use it with very little effort. And so at Point 2, we created the capability to be able to go into all these multiple listing services, take that scrambled egg spaghetti of data and make it look like that smooth data coming out the other side. And that then made the way for syndication. Distribution trumps destination became our cry, where we said it's not about putting it in one place. Those days are gone. because people go everywhere now. They got search engines. So now you put it everywhere. And that is what this slide indicates. As a matter of fact, if you don't have a copy of this slide, you ought to get one and use it in your listing presentations, because it shows how you get exposure for your listings. The listing goes into wherever your multiple listing service, and then it is syndicated out to these different destinations. Syndication. Now, there's two types of syndication, opt-out and opt-in, and that was very controversial for a long period of time. Opt-in means an MLS might adopt syndication, but no listings go out. They tell the brokers, we are capable of syndicating. Tell us if you want your listings to go out. And if a broker says, I want my listings to go out, then it gets syndicated. That's opt-in, because they've opted in. Now, opt-out, that's the other process. Opt-out is the MLS gets ready to syndicate, and then they send all the data out, and they say to the brokers, we've sent your data out. If you don't want it out there, let us know and we'll bring it back. And so there were two ways to get the data out there. One was to get permission first. The other was to bring it down if you can't get permission. And so opt-out, we created opt-out syndication at point 2 in 2009 with Walt Bukowski. And in 14 months, we had accumulated over 1 million listings, which we distributed across the web. We distributed to Zillow. We distributed to Trulia. That most of the companies that wanted that data, we would distribute to them, and we didn't charge them anything to distribute that data. It was free, and that's the continuing model. And so distribution trumped destination. Now, what happens when this listing data, if you haven't figured it out already, it's very valuable. And so we said that kind of think about listing data, about information and data. I have been struggling with this for a while, and I came up with this idea a couple weeks ago, that data is like the dinosaur bones that are buried in the ground, that if they stay there long enough, at some point they turn into oil. And then if you can extract that oil, there's value there. What if you could have bought the whole state of Texas before there were internal combustion engines? Before there was a need for oil? That's what was happening with data. People didn't really know what the value of it was, but it was like somebody was going to figure it out someday. Coal turns into diamonds, right? Put the coal, it's in the ground, it's under pressure. What happens? Turns into diamonds. Data turns into diamonds. Data turns into gold. Data is monetization. Information is the currency of the 21st century, Alvin Toffler. So the data turns into the basis for all choice. And so when I make choices, how do I make choices? If I look at data, I go to the grocery store, I look at data. So I make my choices based on the data I receive. So data is critical because it turns into the basis for all choice. And what we can see with the real estate information is that it creates more data, which gives us more basis for choice. So again, what if you could buy all the land you wanted to buy with all the oil rights before there was an internal combustion engine? You'd probably get it for a lot less price than you could buy it for today. And so when the data first started to come out in real estate, everybody said, well, the data's not worth anything. Yeah, it's worth, we can sell leads, but that's all it's worth. So when you give us the data, then we're going to keep it and use it for whatever we want, and we'll figure out where the value is. Now, we figured that out at point 2, and we started to create data contracts that restricted what people could do with the data, because there are things called derivative products where you can create products around the data. And who should benefit from the derivative products that are created around the data? Should be the people that created the data in the first place. But that's not what was happening. And so this data was out there everywhere, creating more data, but the only people benefiting were these websites that were displaying the data. So now think about this. We remember, as realtors, we say under all is the land. Under all is the land, and upon its wise utilization, right, society is born. Well, now we can say under all is the data. It's important that your listing data is critical. You need to understand this, and that data begets data. And so when you throw data out onto the web, it becomes bait. And people will be attracted to the bait. And if you can then track what they do with the bait, you're what? Accumulating more data. How long do they look at that picture? Which picture do they look like? Where do they go after they leave that picture? Where were they before they got to that picture? All of that information comes from the behavior of the consumer looking at something on the web. So know that when you give somebody your data, you're giving them much more than just that data. You're giving them the ability to create lots of data around that data. And then remember, the data lives forever. And sometimes people get this idea that the data, after it's old, it's not worth anything. You see, today, it doesn't matter how old data is, it's all worth something. Because we've got the computing power today to crunch through a lot of data. And so the power of extensive data crunched by computers today is it helps computers understand the nuance, right? So you think about data. Think about yourself as a data collector. And so you're out there and you talk to people and you collect all this data. And over your lifetime, you start to recognize that when somebody says something to you, what they say it to you one way, it means something. If they say it to you another way, it means something else. Nuance. You can tell if somebody says something to you and they turn their head a certain way, after you've observed that a couple times, you know that that's a nuance and that might mean something completely different. And so by observing, you can start to determine nuance. Well, one of the reasons that computers won't replace human beings is computers aren't good at nuance. And that's the human element. What humans are good at is nuance. And nuance allows us to do things machines can't do. But you know what? Machines can get better at nuance. All they need is what? More data. And so the more data we feed them, and then the more people that look at it, and then the more data, it doesn't matter if they were looking 50 years ago or 60 years ago or 80 years ago or 100 years ago. If we've got that element of data and it goes into many more data, many more elements of data, remember we said about connecting the dots. And so that's what this data is. And so it is so important that you realize that this data has value, that it creates more data, that it helps create the capability to determine nuance, and that's what's going to put you out of business. The capability to determine nuance. So what human beings are good at is providing nuanced what do I do that a computer can't do? I can listen to you, I can talk to you, and I might be able to figure out things that the computer can't figure out. So we always talk about value added and adding value. Understanding and providing nuanced services is something realtors need to start to talk about because it's what a computer can't do. But all this information feeds algorithms, right, and helps computers determine nuance. And so, again, your data has value, it creates value. And so this was an interesting quote about the data. It's not so much about the data as it is about the insight derived from the data. And so if I have data, I don't need to expose it to the public. If I just have data and I let people look at it, I look at the data, anything that I accumulate from it, I don't have to release that. But if I can look and determine behavioral patterns, that could have some value to me. So this is exactly what's happening. It's not so much about the data as it is about the insight derived from the data. Search patterns and trends, what insights and information will help the agent provide better value to the consumer. It's all about nuance. That's an interesting story about Target, just to kind of make this point. And I wish I had a little bit more detail, but around 2012, Target, looking at what people buy, looking at what women signed up for their, I'm going to have a baby, what do they call those? I'm going to have a baby, send me gifts, and these are the gifts I'm interested in, registries. So Target has baby registries. So the women would sign up for the baby registries. So they have that in a database. Then they know who buys what. I mean, think about it. You go to the grocery store. Does the grocery store know what you buy and when you buy it? They ask you for your phone number. You give it to them. They know what time I buy blue juice. They know what day of the week I buy it. They know where I buy. Why? For years, I've been going to the same grocery store. I tell them my phone number. They know what I buy. Well, Target, they know. They first have a registry, so they assume everybody who is in the registry is going to have a baby. Then they know who buys all their products. They started to realize that women who were in their registry bought certain products. That in the first trimester, they bought certain products. In the second trimester, they bought certain products. In the third trimester, they bought hand lotion with no scent. Right? So Target, they just figured it out, right? The computers figured it out. And then, of course, the computers wanting to do proactive marketing, right, wanting to get ahead of it, they figured out who was pregnant. Right? They look and say, okay, these are Probably the women in this registry are pregnant. Now, we know that we have a history going back, let's say, 100 years of women who are pregnant. In the first trimester, they buy this. In the second trimester, they buy. So Target came to the conclusion, Target's computers did, that certain women were pregnant. And so they started sending solicitations out to buy stuff that you would buy if you were pregnant. But one of the young girls who got it, the father got it. And he was beside himself because he didn't believe his daughter was pregnant. Matter of fact, she had not told him yet. And so he got in touch with Target, and as it turned out, Target knew he had to go back to his daughter, and sure enough, she was pregnant. And so the story, and this was in 2012. And so the story is that the data tells you things. It shows you things. You can actually come to very logical conclusions if you look at enough data. What are listings on the internet? Bait. People go there, and what do? They exert different behaviors, and that's all of value. That's a great Target story. I love it. So every time you go shopping, you share intimate details about your consumption patterns with retailers. And they're studying those to figure out what you like, what you need, based on what you buy, so they know what to send you, what coupons to send you. Data mining, they call it. So this data is invaluable. This is that piece from Target. Lots of people buy lotion, but this Target study, they found out that women on the baby registry were buying larger quantities of unscented lotion at the beginning of the second trimester. It was just an observation. And so when you think about the listing data, it shows people what's available. They then act around it. That data is valuable. Who's it valuable to? Might be valuable to Lowe's, who knows that before somebody buys a piece of real estate, they spend so much money. It might be valuable to Home Depot. They know that before people buy something, they spend so much money. So this is just an important point to know where you are. Use your strengths today to help you define your position and role in the future. And so today, as you measure your strengths, determine how you're going to use those strengths to carve out your position in the future. Because we said the real estate industry is always changing. When it comes to data, remember this: protect your data, control your data, and monetize your data. Protect it, control it, monetize it. That doesn't mean hide it. That doesn't mean don't show it to anyone. That doesn't mean you're not going to put it up on the web. That means when you do these things, you're going to do it with the mindset that it needs to be protected, it needs to be controlled, and somebody is going to monetize it. Now, if you're familiar with Zillow, and I know that you are, Zillow announced a couple of years back that they were going to build a living database of all homes. A living database of all homes. And I call that a property wiki. And so they get input from all over. They buy data, they buy input, and then they ask homeowners for input. They ask renters for input. They ask buyers and sellers. And as they build this database of all homes, that's better than a database of what's for sale. And so the fact that a property is for sale is just a moment in time in the life of the property. And so if you have all of the properties in the United States assembled by parcel number, whether the property is for sale or not for sale is the flip of a switch. And so, but there's value in knowing all the properties and all the information about the properties over the lifetime of the properties, because new data can be brought from that data. Zillow is sitting on a gold mine in all of the behavioral data they've collected all these years over all of these homes that have been displayed. So this living database of homes is a great idea. It's a Zillow project, and you need to be aware of what they're doing because it will have an impact on you. Now, another great database is RPR. That's the Realtor Property Resource. This is NAR's database. Now, it's not like Zillow, and it's not available to the public, but it is something, if you're a realtor and you've not looked into it, you should take the time to look into RPR and what it can do for you. So now let's go back to this timeline thing. 2010. In 2010, there were two companies that would go out to multiple listing services, get the data, normalize the data and make it available to portals. Those two companies were ListHub and Point2. ListHub was purchased by Move. That's Realtor.com. So now you look at the marketplace. Realtor.com for 11 years was number one. I'm going to go to the next slide. Realtor.com was number one. But in 2012, they were replaced by Zillow. And Realtor.com dropped down to number three. So Realtor.com was number one. And so they went out and they bought ListHub, which was the largest syndicator of MLS data. They did that in 2010. Why? Well, because if they did that, they could start to put rules on that data when they let Zillow have it. So now if Realtor.com, which was number one, now it went to number three, what is it going to do? Buy the source of the data. And now they can start placing restrictions on Zillow that they don't have on themselves. So it was a great move by Realtor.com for them to buy ListHub. But then 1 month later, Yardi purchased Point2, which was our company, and we were syndicating data. And we had no intention of cutting Zillow off. Why would we cut Zillow off? Because people wanted their data there, consumers wanted it there. So Point2 was purchased by Yardi, by Santa Barbara company. Now it's real interesting as we look at the syndication and the strategies behind it. Yardi decided it would continue to syndicate, and it's a real interesting story. Point2 sold to Yardi, but we couldn't tell anybody for 30 days. The reason we couldn't tell anybody that we had been sold, and we had the number 2 syndication engine in the country, the reason we couldn't tell anybody is we had shareholders who were employees, past employees. And before we could announce the sale, we had to get permission from all the past employees who owned stock. And so we got sold, we signed it, but we couldn't announce it. And we didn't know this, but ListHub had been purchased by Move about the same time. They didn't have the same restrictions we had. They announced it. We had been sold. I heard they had been sold. I knew we had been sold. The day that the announcement that ListHub had been purchased by Move, that morning, Spencer Raskoff called me. Spencer was the CEO of Zillow. And Spencer asked me if I would sell Point2 to Zillow. Now, I couldn't tell him we had already sold. Remember, we're in this quiet period. And so I said, that would be great, but I can't sell it to you. And I can tell you, in a couple of days, I'll be able to tell you why. And a couple of days later, we made the announcement that we had been sold to Yardi, and I talked to Spencer, and I let him know why. And Spencer said, well, you tell Mr. Yardi that I want to buy Point2. Now, Mr. Yardi had his own business. He wasn't interested in selling Point2. I had a special meeting with him, went up and had lunch with Mr. Yardi in Santa Barbara, and he asked me point blank, he said, Saul, aren't you having fun? And I said, I'm having fun. He said, well, then I'm not selling Point2. Not if you're having fun. And so he didn't sell Point2. But about 2 years later, he decided he really didn't want to keep Point2. And so he called up Move, and they bought it. And so Move then had purchased ListHub. They now owned Point2. They now had a potential chokehold on Zillow, because all of the syndicated data collected from the MLSs from the 2 biggest syndicators in the country were now owned by Realtor.com, which was number 3 and didn't want to be number 3. And so then we had a lot of turmoil in the industry, and Zillow figured out other ways to get the data. But right now, that if you want to get syndicated data for your website, you go to ListHub. So there's that diagram. You can see that it's still, even Zillow, as big as it was in 2012, only had 9.21%. Truly had 7.4%. Realtor.com dominated till 2012, 6.22%. And close behind was Yahoo. Well, then in 2014, Move purchased Point2. That's when the syndication engine went to Move from Point2. And in October, now this was interesting, then in October, after Move had secured all of the listing data through the purchase of List Hub and then the purchase of Point 2, then Move sold to News Corp for close to $1 billion. And that's where it sits today. And then on April 15th, List Hub turned off the data feed to Zillow. And again, why? Because that data feed was Zillow's lifeblood. It was their oxygen. So today, here's what we're living with. 80 million unique visitors per month are going to the internet looking at real estate. But there are only 6 million transactions a year. Search has become a game. People like to go game, and if you look at these websites, they got all these gaming things to keep you coming back, make you want to come back. They want you to join. They want you as a consumer to go in and update your property. And I already mentioned Zillow is kind of like a voyeurism. So you can go to Zillow, you can see all kinds of great stuff. This was, they show you castles. So I'm going to tell you right now, I'm never going to buy a castle. But I'd go look at one. And so I enjoyed going to look at the stuff that Zillow throws up there. Fizbos, interesting Fizbos, or a rock house. People remember, it's voyeurism. I go to Zillow just to look at houses. So real estate, also understand it's an upstream business. Now there is a program in real estate called Upstream. Don't confuse these two. When I say upstream, what I mean is that the marketing you do today creates the business of tomorrow. The marketing you did yesterday creates the business of today. So you always got to be doing marketing way ahead. Upstream, way ahead of before that time when somebody is ready to buy a property, right? So that was a nice picture I found of what upstream might look like. But don't you like to go to upstream? When I talk about realtors going upstream, think about the way realtors market. They market upstream. They let people know they're in real estate. Right? They use cards and pads and pens, and they put their name on bus benches. And, right? When I drive by the bus bench that says Mark is selling, he's the best realtor in San Diego, I see that every day. I'm upstream on that, right? But I see it every single day because he's put it in front of me way upstream, way before I'm ready to buy and sell. They put cards and pads and pens and I don't think matches. I got to take that one out, John Riley. Matches. Remember matchbooks. Right? People put their names on matchbooks. Shopping, ever seen a realtor's picture on a shopping card? Calendars, fly swatters. What do these things have to do with real estate? Nothing. They're upstream from a real estate purchase. And so that's the kind of business real estate is. It's an upstream business. It's built on engagements. Real estate, you hear people say this, it's a relationship business. It's a people business. And that means that it must be built on engagements. And so we build our relationships on engagements. The first type of engagement is face-to-face. Now, know this about engagements. They have different weights. Sometimes a certain type of engagement is more valuable than another type of engagement. They have weights. But know that a trust, and that's what you're going for, trust. You don't hit the magic trust button until you've had a certain number of engagements of a certain type that do a certain thing for the individual that creates the trust, and then you're where you want to be. In real estate, you want to be in that trust world. So what are some of the engagements? Well, the obvious ones. Face-to-face. Then you didn't have to be face-to-face, you could do it long distance. And I think one of the first long-distance methods of engaging people was a telegram. I have a telegram from my grandparents to my mom and dad who were on December 8th, 1941, they were Pearl Harbor survivors. My grandparents sent them a telegram. It says, "Are you okay?" Telegram. Can't be face-to-face? Well, that engagement meant something to the family. Letters. Letters are a form of engagement. People used to write letters to one another. People who with very little education and schooling could write wonderful letters, and you would wait for months to get a letter. I remember when I was at the Naval Academy, every day I'd look down the hall at the mailbox to see if there were letters sticking out of the box because those letters were engagements from people. Delayed engagements, but valuable engagements. Engagements. Relationships are built on engagements. Real estate is a relationship business. It's a people business. So you need to be conscious of the different forms of engagements and know that relationships are created over time based on series of engagements. And so what are all the engagement tools that are available to you today, and are you using them effectively? Previously, we had talked about some of the face-to-face and the types of engagements that you made in the past, but today we have email. Big problem with email today is spam. Many years ago when we first had email, people would send jokes, kind of like spam, but people didn't know what to do with it, but they've learned how to use email. And then text. Texting's been around for a while, but it wasn't all that big. Now, some people would rather text than email. Some people would rather text than talk on the phone. You can even do text with a photo and with a voice. Now, a text with no photo is probably not as thorough of an engagement as a text with a photo, or a text with voice might be a little bit better of an engagement than a text without. So different ways to utilize these tools. FaceTime. So you've got that with the iPhone and these types of tools today where you can actually talk to somebody and look at them, and those are engagements. Messenger. So now we've got all these different types of messenger devices. Now it can be text. We can send Facebook messages and LinkedIn messages. And as a realtor, engagements are important to you, and know that some people engage one way and some people engage another way. So knowing the most favored form of engagement of your clients becomes valuable to you in being able to list and sell real estate. I know some people, if I want to get them, I use LinkedIn messaging. I know some people, if I want to reach them, I use Facebook. I know some people, I got to call them. Right? Just kind of depends. Now, there are other tools out there to make engagements and learning a little easier, like Zoom. More tools to allow for more engagement. And again, the main point here is that real estate's a relationship business. It's all about engagement. We have these new tools today, and particularly in the area of social media. Now, you think of that. A lot of people aren't thinking about that. There's great sociological change taking place in the world today as people learn how to use social media. And know this, not everybody knows how to use social media. People's social media skills are different. Some people use like in a certain way, some people use it in another way, but I guarantee you this, if you like something on Facebook or LinkedIn, you just engage that other person, because nobody else will see that like maybe, but they will. And that's an engagement. Now, it's only a slight little engagement, but that's okay, because relationships are built out of a series of engagements. Or you can comment on what somebody writes. That's maybe a little bit deeper form of engagement. If you're trying to build relationships in social media, you need to be able to like, you need to understand what that means. You need to also understand that some people don't know what that means. You need to comment whenever possible. That's an engagement. Or in some cases, reply, which is one step under that. So that's another thing, just learning the nomenclature and structure of these social media platforms, where a comment, and then if you're going to say something on the comment, that's called a reply, and then there's a reply to a reply. A share, boy, that says you really liked what somebody wrote. That's an engagement. If you're on Twitter, you retweet it. The person who you retweet, they'll see that you retweeted it. So all important forms of engagement today that we need to spend time learning how to utilize to build relationships. Now, know this about the internet. When you're on the internet, you're in social media today, you're going to run into a lot of people who are not always right, but never in doubt. And so you just have to deal with that. They're not always right, but they're never in doubt. And so do you really want to argue with people on the internet? I'll tell you, this next one saves me a lot of time. I have to remind myself often, who's the greater fool, the village idiot or the person who argues with the village idiot? And so you can be on Facebook and you can know exactly what you're talking about, but somebody might be insistent that you're not. And then the question is, do you waste your time? Often my wife Janie, when she gets ready to post something, she'll ask me, you think I should post this? And then I'll say, do you want to spend the next 3 hours answering people? Because if you do, then go ahead and post that. So sometimes we have to use discretion in deciding what we're going to post, knowing that we're not always going to get the message across. It's not always going to be understood the way we want it to be understood, and that we're going to end up arguing if we're not careful. And you'll probably never change anybody's mind on Facebook. So engagement should be as frequent as possible, to the point where people start to anticipate. One of the things I do is I write every day online, and I post every day, and I post like 4 major pieces every day. And one of the reasons I do that is that some people will start to anticipate that I'm going to post something in an area that they have an interest in, and they'll start to look for it, and then there's a greater chance they'll see it. They won't miss it. Frequent, anticipated, and if it's relevant to people. I want to make sure that my messaging is relevant. You don't notice things if they're not relevant. When I go to the drugstore, I don't notice the cold remedies unless I got a cold, and then I notice the cold remedies. So relevant is important. Personal is important. If I get a letter addressed to occupant, I probably don't open it. If I get a letter addressed to me, then maybe I will open it. Personal. So how do you build a relationship? You go through these phases. For the real estate industry, I say the first thing you need to do is build rapport with people. How do you build rapport? Engagements. Rapport. Find something that you have in common with somebody, and then you can talk about that, and that'll build rapport. The next step is trust and confidence. Build trust and confidence. How do you build trust and confidence? Make a promise, keep the promise. Building trust and confidence. Demonstrating expertise builds trust and confidence. Remember, Trust is not a commodity. And so that's the one difference in me and a machine, is the fact that I can determine nuance and that I can generate trust if I have all the right types of engagements over time. So trust and confidence. And once I've got trust and confidence, then people might contract with me. They might sign the contract. If I don't have trust and confidence, I'm probably never going to get to the contract. And then once I've got the contract, I got to make sure I ask at every opportunity, have I done everything I can to earn your referral business? Have I done everything I can to earn your referral business? If you don't ask it, you'll probably not get the referral business. If you do ask it, you might get the referral business. It puts you in a much better position. So now here's a piece on the average age of realtors. Have you ever heard that? The average age of realtors is, every year it changes, but it's in the 50s. Average age of realtors is 56, 55, 57, 58. Year after year, it's in the 50s. Why? Because real estate's a relationship business. Very few people get into real estate as their first career. Real estate's typically a second, third, or fourth career. And so I'm of the opinion that to sustain yourself in a 100% commission compensation environment, you have to have participated in about 50 years of relationship building with people. So that's why you got to be about 56 years old. Because by the time you're 56, you know enough people, you've been around enough people, you've been communicating, and you know enough people, and now you can develop relationships in the real estate space. It takes about 50 years. That's why most realtors are 56. But you need to know now that with social media, you can do it faster. Massive sociological changes are in process, right? It's going to affect the nature of relationship businesses. And reserve judgment on this, right? Don't think that you know how this is going to turn out. It's very, very important that you understand that the nature of relationships is changing. Now I can have an interaction with someone on Facebook. I can engage somebody 10 times in one day by liking 10 of their posts or sharing 2 of their posts. And so this idea of the encounters, the engagements that I need, all of a sudden now in social media, I'm given a whole new toolbox of engagements, and I can do it in much faster fashion than I could before. So while the average age of realtors is 56, I think you're going to start to see that come down because relationships are built faster, trust is created faster in this social media world. And one of my favorite websites is Nextdoor. And Nextdoor works really well. I've been involved in community online since the 90s. And Nextdoor, I see people communicating. I see neighbors who don't even know that they live next door to one another are now talking to one another. I mean, I live in a neighborhood, I've lived there for over 50 years, and I know people a couple doors down, I don't even know their names, right? But now, in the social media world and on Nextdoor, we're seeing people communicate. Now, when I talk to realtors, they'll say to me, oh, I tried Nextdoor. And all it is about people helping other people find their dogs. Have you heard that criticism of it, right? I said, what would build more trust and confidence in a platform? If you lost your dog and somebody who was communicating with you on Nextdoor helped you find your dog, what would you think of Nextdoor? And I got to say, you probably have some trust in that platform and some confidence. And the people that are the naysayers are people who have no experience in doing this. And so remember, this is massive sociological change. Some people are in kindergarten, some people are in high school, some people are got graduate degrees in this. So reserve judgment, observe human behavior. And here's something else. As you participate in social media, you're going to learn what other people mean, what other people mean when they do something. I know people who I've never met, but I can tell you what they mean when they like something. I can tell you what they mean when they make a certain kind of statement. Why? Because I've observed them. So engagements, relationships are built on engagements. And the number of engagements to create a relationship will change as new technologies are introduced. So we got new ways to engage when Facebook came along. Matter of fact, Facebook at first you could just like things, right? And then they came up with things with smiles and thumbs up, lots of different things that you could do. Or cry, right? So these technologies will come up with new ways to engage. More engagements more often. This is key. This is what social media does for you. You're able to make more engagements more often. You can not only create new relationships quicker, you can reestablish old relationships very quickly. I established a relationship with my best friend in 7th grade in Norfolk, Virginia on Facebook. So real interesting. And we immediately got back together, and we had, in a very short period of time, we were both back up to speed on each other's lives. So there's an evolution of the development of relationships over time, and these platforms are going to help you develop relationships. So choose the ones you're going to operate on, and know that every time you like something, every time you share something, every time you make a comment or a reply, you're actually engaging somebody. And engagements get you closer to trust and confidence trust and confidence gets you closer to contracts. So where do you go to do this? You go online. Why do you go online? That's where people are congregating today. They're congregating online. And so you got to go online, and you have to build your online presence or your online persona, where now every day it has to be consistent. Use the social media tools to build and sustain relationships. And remember that contacts create contracts. Contacts create contracts. Contact with people creates opportunity. Now, in this area of online community, it's important to know that people are forming online communities. Different groups of people get together, birds of feather, they come together in online community. Now, online community is not new. It's been around for a long time. There's a book back in the 90s, NetGain, and we use that as our community Bible. And from that, we see some of these new social media platforms that allow you to do some of the things that are outlined in the book NetGain. So NetGain is still a good read for people interested in online community. And the message is engage. And I talked about Nextdoor. I believe Nextdoor is the place for realtors to go to prospect. Now, Nextdoor might have some real estate advertising programs. That's not what I'm talking about. You can only join Nextdoor in the community in which you reside. So join it in the community in which you reside, and then be a neighbor. Participate as a neighbor, not as somebody trying to sell something. And in time, people will see you helped somebody find their dog. You helped somebody do something. You were helpful in something else, and all of this will build trust and confidence. And Nextdoor lets you do it in your neighborhood. I have not seen a better farming tool than Nextdoor, but I hear the comments about it, and what it says to me is people are just not, we haven't evolved yet where we see the benefit of this. But if I were still selling real estate today, I'll tell you, I would be all over Nextdoor. Just a piece from Nextdoor. Look, it says, post, dogs greeting dogs on leash. Now that's not worth anything. People who like dogs, that's really valuable to them. And so know that what you see as wasteful or not valuable conversation might be very valuable conversation to somebody else. So now we look at the real estate industry, and we see the real estate industry is changing, and we hear everybody talking about it. And I already talked about from World War II up through the 90s how real estate's always changing. And now we hear people saying, yeah, we get that, but this time it's different. Why is it different this time? Well, here's why people are saying it's different. Number one is there's capital in quantity. People realize that real estate is a gateway business. And so when people buy real estate, they buy other stuff. Before they buy real estate, spend a bunch of money at Lowe's. After they buy real estate, spend a bunch of money at Home Depot. And so this capital is coming in because it is where people are coming in and commerce gets generated. So people want to participate in real estate. We now have more capital than we've ever seen in real estate. We also have people engaging in real estate now. Because we've got these communities, we see people are engaging, and that's important. And we also see generational differences. So different generations have different ways of using the technologies, and some of these newer technologies that people say nobody will ever use, well, the younger people might say, are you kidding? We love it. And innovation. We have new concepts of owning and new platforms. And so we'll talk a little bit about this, but the ownership of real estate, the basic ownership of real estate, the concept is changing. And then we have something called long tail, and we have to keep long tail in mind because today it doesn't matter. You don't need 50% of the people to make your product a success, because today you can reach everybody in the world at the push of a button at the speed of light. And so you need small percentages of people for you to be successful, for your product to be successful. And that's referred to as long tail. I say there's a buyer for everything somewhere. And today you can reach them. You don't have to sell everybody. You just have to sell enough to sustain you. Long tail is part of the reason that it's different this time. So we hear people talking today about the real estate workplace is different. Why is it different? Well, for one reason, real estate is a huge target. It's actually like the last huge target. If you think about the commissions earned in real estate annually, just the commission dollars, about $100 billion a year in commissions. $100 billion, where did that come from? There are about 6 million sales a year. And if the average sales price is about $250,000 and 6% commission, you can do the math, but we're up around $100 billion in commission. That's a big target. That's huge. People come into the business, they say, I want a piece of that $100 billion in commission. Zillow comes in, they say, I want a piece of that $100 billion. Troika, I want a piece of that $100 billion. That's a lot of money. Put it in perspective, the total annual revenues on eBay, $9.5 billion. So just know, real estate, we don't think about the big target real estate is, but it's giant. Consumer expectations are changing. And we're going from mass production to mass customization. Now that's an important thing to keep in mind. Whereas mass production was once what ruled the world, really. That's what we were all trying to do. Companies were trying to do, mass produce things. But technology today allows for mass customization, and that is changing the world. And we'll see how that happens in real estate. Well, I already talked about the change. The iPhone's only been around 13 years. Massive change in what you think about. I got the first iPhone. There it is. It was a white one. Called a girl's iPhone. I don't know why, but they gave me a bunch of trouble at point two when I had that white iPhone, right? But that was and when we would go to dinner, we would sit around at dinner and we'd all be asking questions and looking them up for like the first year. That was like the most novel thing. So people's behaviors change. And then people's concepts of rudeness change. You know, it used to be if I was at dinner with somebody and they got on their phone, I would be offended by that. It seems like nobody's offended by that anymore. People are always talking to you. They're on their phone at the same time. They're texting at the same time. So habits are changing, perceptions are changing, and consumers' expectations are changing. Still, for you as a realtor, I recommend when you're with a client, stay with them, right? So now we also know this, that the velocity of innovation is accelerating, that the changes are coming faster and faster and faster, and that's one of the reasons people are saying it's different this time, because the velocity of the innovation is accelerating. Now, real important point in real estate, and what's made real estate one of the last areas to be conquered by technology, is that there's a lack of liquidity. And so when you buy a piece of real estate, if you want to sell it, typically there's a period of time that it takes to sell it. Somebody wants to buy it, they don't usually have all cash, they have to get a loan, it takes 45 days to get the loan, but before they even came in and made the offer, you had to advertise it and put it on the market, so there's a lack of liquidity. Now real estate has got marketability, but there's a lack of liquidity, and so that's affected real estate and what you could do with it for many, many years. But now we have new business models that will facilitate liquidity in the acquisition and disposition of real property. And this is a very critical point, right? New business models facilitate liquidity, make it easier to get your money out. How important is you to get your money out of real estate today? If it's not important, you're not concerned with liquidity. But some people want to get their money out right away, and it doesn't have to be everybody that wants to get their money out right away, because remember I talked about long tail. If some of the people want to get their money out right away, you can create something today with the technology that allows them to do that. So new business models facilitate liquidity in the acquisition and disposition of real property. Now, this slide just changes over time, but this will give you an idea when I talk about the capital that's coming into the real estate space. And if you're a small broker, you just went out and got your broker's license and you're worried about, or you're an agent, you just got your license and you're worried about where you're going to get enough money to pay your MLS dues. Because I know people like that. Where are you going to get enough money to join the board of realtors? But look at all this money flowing into the real estate space. They're after the business. Open Door in 2016 got Open Door owned by Zillow, $210 million, and they were valued at $1 billion. Redfin in July of of 2017 raised 138 million bucks. Compass. Now Compass, and people are worried about Redfin, they're worried about Compass. Compass raised $450 million. Now you just got your real estate license and you don't have $120 to pay your MLS fees. And you got companies out there that are spending investors. I tell you what, if you got $450 million in the bank, you can make a lot of mistakes and stay in business. Open Door, another round, $135 million. Purple Bricks, March of last year, $177 million. SoftBank put $800 million into Compass and Open Door. And so we can just make these lists up. It's just like unbelievable billions of dollars flowing into the real estate space. And that's why people say this time it's different. Now, I talked about when Prudential purchased Merrill Lynch in 1989 for $300 million. That kind of matches these numbers, right? So we had that kind of we had big money before, but not like this. Alex Rampel, if you haven't seen his video on disrupting the real estate marketplace, it's pretty interesting. And he's got it wrong in a couple places, but I think for the most part, he's got it right. He says, in the future, you'll buy your house from or sell your house to a big company offering a full stack of services. So what he's saying is brokerage firms are going to be big companies. Because if people want liquidity, they want to be able to sell it right now. And if you're worried about paying your MLS fee, you're not going to say to your seller, don't worry, if I don't sell your house, I'll buy it from you. But the big companies, they can say that. We'll buy it from you right now. We'll give you, we'll buy it for less, but we'll give you the liquidity that you want. And so people want more choice. They're going to go to these bigger companies that offer many things that a small company can't do. Now, what's going to happen, I think, is some of the smaller companies are going to get together. They're going to find other providers that kind of help them provide the same things that the big companies provide. That's just more of the evolution that's going to take place. But right now, this is what people are singing to you, and they're telling you it's going to happen right now. But one of the reasons they tell you it's going to happen right now are these are the people that are putting money into this. And of course, all the people who put money into something, they all want it to happen right now. So the tools to go full stack, that's what Alex Rampel talks about. For a brokerage firm to go full stack, well, they need to be able to do title. Brokers have been doing this for a long time. They need to be able to do mortgage. Brokers have been affiliated for a long time. They need to be able to do escrow. Brokers have been doing this for a while. They need to be able to offer brokerage services. Well, that's what brokers do. They need to be able to property management. Somebody might want to buy a house and have it managed for an investment. People need to have portfolio management because now maybe not one house, but the broker's buying 50 houses or 100 houses or 5,000. You got to have the whole portfolio. When do you buy? When do you sell the houses? How long do you hold them? What's going on in the marketplace that would dictate when to buy and when to sell? And so these brokerage firms are going to be doing this, need investment management. So now when we see the tools to go full stack, what kind of technologies do you need to be able to offer all of these to your consumers? So driving change in real estate today is first the on-demand economy where I want it all, I want it now, and I want it for nothing. The technology allows that to happen. The capital is there, and they're raising costs in real estate. So now we got these raising costs. Who can afford to buy anymore? Even at low interest rates, the property prices keep going up. We need new approaches to real estate, and we're starting to see them. Traditional broker services, here's what you did. You listed, or you work with buyers, or today you can actually sell your house to a real estate firm. These are services brokers are starting to offer. Open Door through Zillow. Buyers can buy the property and lease it back from you. So new opportunities are being made available in real estate. Now the securities industry, because this is a good example to me. I think the real estate industry is kind of looking like becoming, in a way, like the broker-dealer securities industry. Now, if you're not familiar with that, you have market makers and it provides liquidity. And so when I want to buy stock, if I go into my TD Ameritrade account and I want to buy Apple, when I buy the Apple, I might be buying the Apple stock from my partner, John Riley, might have put his Apple stock on the market at the same time. And it just so happens they hit and I buy his 100 shares. But sometimes that's not the case. Sometimes when I go in to buy it, I might end up buying it out of the portfolio of my broker. They call them broker dealers. And then there are market makers because what if I want to sell my stock for a certain price and nobody wants to buy it for that price? And then nobody wants to buy it and the price drops because nobody wants to buy it. Somebody's got to step in and buy it. And those are the market makers. And those are people that have seats on the stock exchanges and they pay money to be in these positions. So they're the people that have to buy at certain points in time. So the securities industry, they already got this down where the brokers also own the assets. And in the real estate world, we're starting to see brokers owning the assets. That's common in the securities world. Now, technology today can tell you a lot of things. It can tell you, particularly if you're an investor, when should you buy a house in what neighborhood? And when should you sell that house? What should the price be? Should it be staged? Where should you run ads? And what type of broker should you use? So technologies can answer questions that we haven't had answers to in the past. Now, here's the real property purchase process, the way I see it. Buyers need to get credit approved. Properties need to be inspected. Properties need to be appraised. Properties need to be insured. We need title insurance, that's casualty insurance. We need title insurance. We need to validate and transfer funds. And we need to document, prepare the documents, execute the documents, record. So all of those steps. And one of the reasons that the real estate sales process takes a long time is we haven't connected those databases. What if the buyer's credit report and the property inspection and the appraisal and the insurance, what if those are all, like all those databases can talk to one another? Now when I go online, I get my credit approved immediately. The property gets inspected. If that's in the database, that's already known. If the appraisal's already been entered, that's already known. They can assign title insurance and property insurance right out of the database, and we can have almost instantaneous closings. Now, if you haven't been online and looked at a securities trading account, I'll take you to my Ameritrade account and kind of point out what you can do online. You can look at the account, you can trade, you can do research, you can do retirement planning, education, all the research you need to do to be able to find the stock you want to buy. And then when you go down here, you put in a buy, you put in the quantity, you name the stock. You say what type of order, do I want to buy it right now or do I want to buy it at a certain price and how much is that price? And then I click the button and what happens? Let's say I want to buy some Apple stock. I put in here I want to buy 100 Apple, APPL. I want to buy it at market. I want to buy it at market so I don't need the price and I want it to be a day order. I put that in and then when I click, but if I click review order, then I get another button that says order. When I click order, think about this. I buy 100 shares of Apple. The stock is transferred to my name. The money is pulled out of my account. They know it's me. They know it's my account. The stock certificates don't come to me, but there are digital stock certificates. My name goes on it. So all the things you would do to transfer title of real property, right now we do it in seconds online to transfer stocks. You say, well, yeah, real estate's a lot more expensive. No, you buy hundreds of thousands of dollars or sell hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of stock, boom, just like that. So the apparatus is there. And as people decide that their liquidity is more important to them than the price that they get, you're going to see some changes and you're going to be able someday to go online and buy real estate just like this, just like you buy stock. Now, another big entry into our world today are platforms, and people don't really understand platforms. They're incorrect definitions of it. They use it to refer to a piece of technology rather than a business model. So when we talk platforms, we're really talking about a business model where we're bringing together the party that creates and the party that wants what's created. And really what a platform does, it kind of eliminates the intermediary, the middleman. And so we can put producers in direct contact with consumers with a platform. Now, in the real estate industry today, people talk about platforms. Typically, they're talking about a CRM tool, a customer relation management tool, or a lead management tool. And they refer to these things as platforms. And really, when I think of platform, I think of Apple or Uber or Amazon platforms. And we're going to see platforms in real estate. Computing platforms, underlying computer system on which application programs can run. Application program, an API, right? Application programming interface. These things that the programmers use today can be more easily used on platforms, right? So platform is just a big term we need to be familiar with. We need to be appraised of it and know that these big technology platforms in the real estate space are really just that, platforms. CRM is another big tool today. CRM, a customer relationship management tool. That is going to become the biggest piece of software used by individuals and used in corporate America. People don't use them well. They only learn to use a piece of it. We say, what's the best software? It's the software you use. But I will say to you, if you want to be successful in real estate in the next 5 years, you need to master, not learn, master CRM. Now, which is the best? The software you use. We've been looking very, very hard at a software, a platform called LionDesk. And if you haven't taken a look at that CRM platform, it's worth a look. Now, as a realtor, one of the things you also want to know is your database needs to be yours. You don't want to put your database into a platform that somebody else owns you can't get your data out of. So look at different platforms that allow you to bring your data out. Look at CRM tools. No, the best one is the one you use, but some are a lot more robust than others. Some do a lot more than others. Some are actually platforms. And when you're out there in the marketplace looking at them, take a look at LionDesk. We think that the new release does some things that other CRM tools are not doing. Now, as you adjust to these new business models, this is what you've got to adjust. I love this cartoon where the kid sets up the lemonade stand. Lemonade, 25 cents, and then across the street, the freelemonade.com. And so how do you compete with free lemonade? How do you compete with free? And yet you need to compete with free, but know that free can destroy you. Go back to how many of you would pay $2 a listing per month to have your listing on Zillow and to get all the leads that come from that and to not have your competitors' faces on your listing? Because what happens on Zillow today is your competitors' faces go on your listing, and people are going to get leads from your listing. But what if you got all the leads from your listing and none of your competitors' faces were there and you only had to pay $2 a month? Well, back in 1995, we already decided that you didn't want that, that you wanted free instead. So know that free is something you have to be very careful with. It's a word people like, but it's not necessarily the right approach to the applications of technologies today. Now, we've got a lot of different brokers out there that we want to look at because this is an evolving business, and all of the things we've talked about up to this point lead us to this next segment where we're going to talk about the business models that are out there. So now we've got some modern brokers. I talked about Compass. Compass is going out. Look, they buy, rent, sell agents, and they've acquired lots of agents, lots of companies. This is a well-funded entity, but they're traditional in the normal sense. They're a modern broker, but I went through the site, I didn't see discount on that, the word discount, one spot, one place on that site. So they're not a discount broker. They say our seasoned experts use proprietary tools, some kind of platform, to price and position your home to find the best buyer. So Compass, they're out there. They're buying companies. Is that a change? Remember Prudential bought Merrill Lynch? I mean, we've got this. People get really concerned about this, but we've seen all this stuff before. HomeSmart, another one, new company, experience, knowledge, service, professionalism. They're not saying discounts. EXP. Now, EXP is one of these online, and my business partner and I, John Riley, we've actually been into EXP world, and we've seen this thing. Remember, we told you relationships are about what? Engagements. And so how you engage with people. And I'll tell you what, you might not think that an engagement with I always lose track of this word, John Riley. With an avatar, right? So you go into EXP, you got an avatar. But guess what? Your avatar engages with other avatars. And so some people, that's games, that's just playing. Yeah, it all starts out that way. But I think the people at EXP understand the power of community and the power of engagement, and they got some generational knowledge that other people are missing. So again, lots of new things out there to look at. And then we've got what they call the modern discount brokers, but I don't call these people modern discount brokers. Missing. So again, lots of new things out there to look at. And then we've got what they call the modern discount brokers, but I don't call these people modern discount brokers. I call them modern brokers. Here's Redfin. I don't think Redfin is a modern discount broker, even though, look what they say, now get that, sell for more, prove it. What's happening today? I don't have to prove that. I can just make blatant statements. I'm going to sell your property for more, and you're going to pay as low as 1% listing fee. Now, they don't say that that's a discount. They just tell you this is what you're going to pay. And I don't know if you've seen their ads lately. They say, don't get stuck in the past, list with the Redfin agent. They say, don't get stuck in the past, list with the Redfin agent, list for less, and get thousands of dollars more. Now, Redfin also has a different employment model. And they're actually employing people and giving them benefits. So that's a different approach. Purple Bricks, that's another one. Now notice, if you watch the commercials, it's all about discounts. But what do they say right on their website? A full service brokerage experience for thousands less. So they're not marketing themselves as a discount broker. They're marketing themselves as a full service opportunity. They just charge you less money. REX, another one. Tech-focused real estate company operates outside of the MLS. They raised $45 million, and they're in 4 or 5 different states. They charge 70% less than traditional agents. So how do you compete with that? Free lemonade. You start lemonade 25 cents a glass. Freelemonade.com. You have to figure out ways to compete. You need to be able to deliver your value proposition. What is your value proposition? You need to differentiate yourself from the competition. You can't do that unless you know what the competition is. Now there are referral companies out there. These are companies that they'll actually market, that they'll find you the best agent. And then they will market to agents that want to appear on the site and get leads, pay to be there. So you can get leads by joining a company like HomeLight, and they will market on television, get leads, and then you get the leads because you're paying HomeLight. Referral companies. They say, we have buyers interested in buying a home in your neighborhood. Yes, I would be willing to talk. See how, and so you should go look at these sites. If you haven't gone and looked at these yourself, go through. This is your competition. You got to create a compelling argument why you're better than these guys are. And I've heard the tired old stories from realtors about the Zillows, about the Troyas, about the Redfins. That's not going to work. Consumers aren't going to listen to it. Effective agents, that's enough. Find the perfect realtor based on their actual sales performance. Now, if you're a consumer, would you be willing to risk the biggest purchase of your life with someone who's done 0 transactions this year? Or would you prefer to have somebody that's done 10, 15, 20 transactions? Oh, no, no problem. I don't mind working with somebody who's never done this before. Now, I think that people want experience. And so here's this company. They're actually, now how do they get this? I don't know. I know there are tools that you can go into the MLS and extract this data, but I don't know how these guys are doing it. But they'll charge you, and you can go and they'll charge consumers, give consumers a name, charge you. Effective agents. And you're going to see more of these rating kind of services. Now here's another big point. Here's another big point, that homes are now seen as viable investments for larger companies. Mom and pop buy a house, buy 2 houses. But now big companies are looking at owning lots of houses. And so houses and condos are an asset class. And so here's some important statistics we oftentimes don't recognize. 64.2% are owner occupied. That's the owner occupancy rate, which means that we've got 35% renters. So we've already got people who are used to renting. Huge part of the population. It doesn't have to be everybody. Remember long tail? It doesn't have to be everybody. 35% renters. So what we're going to see in the future, fewer sales, fewer commissions. Fewer sales, fewer commissions. Right now the number of sales is about 6 million a year, about 12 million sides a year. So here's another one, iBuyer. This is why we're going to see fewer sales. The iBuyer, you hear this iBuyer, what is it? Single family residences investments. You got the iBuyer. Open Door, this is Zillow. They're the ones that got hundreds of millions of dollars. Open Door, they're a brokerage firm owned by Zillow, and they'll go out and you can make an offer and they'll buy your house. Why do they want to buy your house? Well, people say, because they want to flip it and make money. Maybe. But maybe they want to hold it because you know what? If you hold a house for 10 years, it could turn out to be a really great investment. And right now, if you invest your money in interest-bearing investments, you don't get very much. You invest in certain things, you don't get very much. And so housing is going to become more difficult for people to buy. It's getting more expensive. Go to Europe. Hard to buy property in Europe. Some people have already recognized they don't make any more real estate. Buy as much as you can, never sell it. And so the idea that these companies like Open Door aren't going to make any money because they can't flip them for enough, then you're not looking at the big picture. Companies are going to buy these things and flip them if they can, and if they can't, they're going to hold on to them. And I guarantee you, 10 years from now, they're going to be worth a lot of money, a lot more money. So Open Door. Fly Homes, they do it another way. So different ways to a better way to buy or sell, where companies will come in, they'll buy it right from you. Knock, another big company, they just got a bunch of money. Well, you can trade your house in. You can lease it back. There's all these things that you can do today. Easy Knock, cash out your equity without moving, sell the master bedroom. Sell the master bedroom to somebody, right? So now you can sell pieces. This is a brand new company. That's kind of like an equity share. See, that's an old idea too, isn't it? And so these are things, we've been doing these things for years, but now we got the technologies. And here's what happened before. Doing little transactions took way too much work. But today with the technology, you can do the little transactions are just immediate. They take place. So things that we couldn't do because we didn't have the technology to make the little transaction cost effective, now the little transaction can be cost effective. So here's a company, let you sell out. Really, I got a little box down there. A barely 2-year-old company that will give you cash for your home and let you stay on as a renter for up to 5 years. That's an interesting concept. Buy your house, give you the money you need, but you get to stay there. There's going to be all kinds of variations on these ownership themes. You need to know about them. You need to be informed. Remember, Alvin Toffler said, knowledge is power. Information is the currency of the 21st century. This iBuyer concept, 10 years ago, people you were competing against to buy homes were your neighbors and people in your community. Today, you're competing with Zillow because they want to buy your house. Open Door, Wall Street. They want to own the same asset and rent it out. They don't want to live in it. They want to own it and rent it out. Institutional investors have new ways to package, to own, and to sell real property assets. To get back to the liquidity thing. They're solving the liquidity and real estate issue with the technology. That's going to open up all kinds of new doors. So there's going to be new marketplaces. This was Sean Black, CEO of Knock, the company I just showed. They believe that the U.S. Real estate market is in for serious realignment. Serious realignment. Within 5 to 10 years, now this is an interesting quote, 50% of all sellers will be offloading their home to a company that makes fast, all-cash offers. 50%. He says, because people I need to know if I need to sell my real estate, I can sell it right now. And you know what? That might make real estate more appealing to people that don't buy it because they can't sell it right now. All of a sudden, we might get a whole bunch of new buyers we never had before because we can sell it right now, right? And so these things don't necessarily limit what's happening. They actually open to what's happening. People need the certainty. I want to buy a house. I want to know I can sell it right away. Oh, I got to take a little bit less. That's okay. I got to sell it right away. Will everybody need that? No. We don't need everybody needing it. Long tail. Now there's new ways to subdivide property. This is a great phrase. I love this phrase. I was a securities broker for many years. And so dynamic yield maximization really got me when I heard this. And so there's new concepts of owning. Dynamic yield maximization, Alex Rampel, this is where I got this quote. Dynamic yield maximization from otherwise static assets. You see, real estate's a static asset. It doesn't move. It's a static asset. You can make money on only a certain way. How do you make money in real estate? You sell it for more or you rent it out. That's what people did. Now there are new ways to make money for real estate owners. Increasing, and this is key, increasing the utility value. You can use the real estate for more things today than you could use it for before. That increases the overall value. Now let's talk a little bit about dynamic real estate. When I was got my real estate broker's license early on, I remember we managed properties. I managed a racquetball club. In the mornings, we would go out and we would eat at Rutford's restaurant on El Cajon Boulevard. And Rutford's was open 24 hours a day. And I remember marveling to my real estate broker buddies, guys I went to high school with, we all turned out to be real estate brokers, about this guy had it made because he had real estate. Most people have the real estate, they close it down at night, and they don't make any money. Here's this guy, the restaurant is open 24 hours a day. And so he made money on his real estate day and night. Dynamic. Right? Not just during the day. 24 hours a day. Condominiums changed the way that we used real estate. Prior to the condominium, it was California Airspace Condominium Law, whatever that was, around 1978, the only way you could divide, prior to 1978, the only way you could divide real estate up, subdivide it, was this way, right? Vertically. And the concept of real property ownership was you owned from the center of the earth, you'll remember this from your real estate principles class, from the center of the earth to the heavens above except as limited by law. So you bought it, you owned from the center of the earth, you bought your house. So what they did in 1978, they said, what if we could divide it? What if we said you own the land, but it starts 10 feet above the ground? And then you own from 10 feet above the ground to 20 feet above the ground. Then somebody else owns from 20 feet above the ground to 30 feet above the ground. And somebody else owns from 30 feet to California airspace condominiums. And that's how condominiums were created. We didn't always have the ability to subdivide real estate that way. We created it. And then they created something called timeshares, where you owned a piece of the real estate or the airspace, but only for a week a year or 2 weeks a year. And now they could sell 52 pieces of that same property, dynamic real estate, giving it new uses. Then we see Airbnb. That's kind of new, but it's not new. They're just renting out a room in the house. You can do it easier now because of the technology, but that's dynamic. And now if you have a house and it's on the beach, maybe you can make more money with the house on the beach, leasing it out to people who want to live on the beach for a vacation, than you can selling the house or renting the house out monthly. So we have new ways to utilize the real estate that's going to give us more utility, more things we can do with it, more utility value. That's going to drive the prices up. Roommates. Used to be we didn't like to take in roommates. I sold and we managed a 10-unit apartment building by San Diego State University a number of years ago. And the kids couldn't afford it. They were 2-bedroom, 2 baths with 4 kids in each one, right? Because they were bunk beds. And it was like living, and it was almost on campus. That's why we could do it. It's a beautiful building, right on the street off the campus. And the kids would rent, and they would come together, and there'd be 4 of them in a room, and they would have roommates. But the problem was, what if one roommate leaves? You got to get the parents to sign the document. How do you get new roommates? It was really a hassle to do. Nonetheless, we made more money renting the property that way. But today you can do it. There's websites we showed you that'll actually help you find roommates. Or equity sharing, where now you can buy a property with a group of people, which, you know what, as property gets more expensive, that's the way to do it. If you can't buy a whole piece of real estate, buy a little piece of real estate. The first piece of real estate I bought with a friend of mine. As a matter of fact, I was a naval officer. I had a job with the U.S. Navy. I had a buddy I went to high school with. I knew that buying a house was a good idea. My parents always bought houses. They always sold them for more than they bought them for. My dad was in the Navy. We traveled around. So when I was old enough, I wanted to buy a house. I was stationed in San Diego. I wanted to buy a house. I didn't really want to buy it alone. I didn't want to live alone. I asked my high school buddy, I said, let's buy this house. He said, I'm not sure I'm going to keep my job. I said, don't worry, I got a government job. I'm always going to get paid. And so if you can't pay it, I'll pay it. He said, yeah, but what happens if you die? And then I said, no problem. I wasn't married. My parents didn't need any of my money. I said, no problem. We'll own it joint tenants. If I die, you get to own it. If you die, I get to own it. So we did this. We bought this together, an equity share. About 12 months later, we had another high school buddy. He wanted to buy in, and for $10,000 to each of us, because our property had gone up in value, he gave each one of us $10,000. He now owned a piece of that house. So now 3 of us were living in that house. And then the 3 of us went out and we bought another house, a bigger house, and we rented out the first house. So 3 of us are living in the one house, we're renting out the next house. And we owned that house, we kept that rental for about a year. Then we decided we wanted to buy a car wash business. And so we exchanged out of that rental house and we bought the car wash business. That was 1979, and we still own that piece of real estate in San Diego. We bought the 2 houses next to it. What's the point? With partners, equity sharing. And we had to do all the documents, and it was a hassle, but you know what? It's many years later, and we have a lot more money than we would have had if we had not done this. And today, you can go online and do this, because now this equity share is made easier with technologies. So again, it's not new, it's new ways to do it. Sale leaseback. Sell the house, I want to live here, but I want the money, so I'm going to sell my house to you. You want a tenant. Now here's another thing. The guy that buys the house that wants the tenants, if they sell the house, you own the house, they're there, they're familiar with it. You don't have to put anybody in it. And when they leave, then you can either re-rent it or sell it. You've seen this co-working spaces now, where in the commercial world, people are sharing working space. Now, this is all about dynamic real estate. Real estate, which was once a static asset, is now becoming a more dynamic asset. We're gaining more utility, and that increases the value. So this is the point. Technology removes much of the friction from the transaction. It was a sale leaseback. So here's a company, Point. And go look at these companies. They're an equity share site where you can go in and get up to 250, no monthly payments, right? Unlock your home wealth with point, right? You can go in and sell a bedroom, Now, again, I haven't spent a lot of time. I haven't tried them, but you can see the ideas that are out there, and there's a lot of money flowing into, and you know what? A lot of these aren't going to make it. But remember, I say you can make a lot of mistakes with billions of dollars. And enough mistakes, they might go out of business, but not before they put you out of business. Roof stock, they give you a 30-day money-back guarantee. If you don't like it, we'll give you a money-back guarantee. So single families now are becoming the type of investment that institutions are looking for. And so just know that looking at some of these companies. Now, live with roommates, I talked about that. We work for housing. Bungalow, these are some of the sites you can go to. This is a roommate site. Common, it's a roommate site. Co-living is city living made better. Co-living. Shared apartment living, home share. Star City. So these equities, there's lots of these companies. Is it different this time? I don't know, but there's lots of different ideas that are coming into the marketplace. So this is key. This is what we want to remember about real estate now. Dynamic yield maximization. We have new utility value. That house on the beach might be better utilized as an Airbnb than your home, right? New ways to own by individuals in Wall Street. So now individuals can own, but what if you've got billions of dollars that want to own it as an investment asset? That's going to be competition for you as a homeowner. Also, as a realtor, you're going to have less people to sell to because a lot of the sales are going to take place where one of these large companies sells to another large company, where the portfolios of these companies that own all these assets, where they start selling to each other, which will cut down on the number of individual sales, which will limit the number of sales for the people that sell real estate for a living. Now, Robert Refkin, who's the CEO of Compass, he's calling for a national MLS. Now, national MLS, I think is kind of a dumb idea just because of the way that it all works today. But he's on to something. If you think about the average monthly MLS fee is about $30. And if we've got 1 million agents and brokers paying $30 a month, that's $30 million a month. That's a $360 million a year secure revenue stream. Now, how much would it cost to build a national MLS? It certainly wouldn't cost $360 million a year. And so for a lot less than 300, if in fact the technology were all it was about, you could do this for a lot less, create a valuable stream of revenue and a very valuable asset. MLS is not that generic. And that's what makes the idea of saving all this money so far out. Maybe someday. But right now, it's a little out there. We are coming down in the number of MLSs. So that's another point. The number of MLSs was over 1,000 a few years ago. Now it's 600. We got people telling you that you've got to consolidate the MLSs, consolidate the MLSs. Well, Robert Refkin, this is really consolidation. Get it all down to one. But there's no reason that the associations of realtors need to listen and collapse all their MLSs. An MLS is a business asset of an association. It's a business asset. If somebody comes to you and says, sell your business, give away your business asset, give away the asset that makes the most money for you, you're probably not going to give it away if you think about it at all. And yet we've got people coming at the industry saying you've got to consolidate. No, you don't. The people that say that don't know any more than the people that say otherwise. Maybe you need some way for everybody to see everything, but whether or not that needs to be owned at one spot, I question that. Particularly when you look at the politics and you look at the nature of real estate, and we know that all real estate is local. It's not done all exactly the same. Yeah, you could save a lot of money. There's a lot of other things, and maybe that's a good idea. I just say approach that with caution. The DOJ, the Department of Justice, and the National Association of Realtors are always going back and forth over issues of antitrust. And we might see some pushback in the future with employees and independent contractors. So as we look at the evolution of real estate companies moving into the future and what brokers do and what agents do and what buyers do and what sellers do, know that there's also a framework of governance and law around everything. What we will see in the next couple of years is things are changing. And we're already seeing fundamental changes, paradigm shifts, we call them. What is a paradigm? A paradigm is a model. It's the way things are done. The National Football League has a football paradigm. The field's 100 yards long, got goalposts, right? That's a paradigm. And if you understand the paradigm, then you learn how to compete within the paradigm. And so paradigms are real important, and they're just models of the way things are done. But those models are changing. A change of a paradigm is not just a change, this is key, it's a fundamental change. Fundamental. And we are seeing fundamental changes taking place in the real estate industry today. So here's what you've got to do to stay ahead of it. You've got to keep asking yourself this question: what's currently impossible? And if it were possible, it would fundamentally change my business. Because if I can figure that out, then I can prepare. Now here's the rub here though. Remember earlier I said, your wildest dream is not wild enough, there is no more science fiction. That means that nothing's impossible, right? So anything you can think of might be possible, so you need to start to think about preparing for it. Now here's an interesting example about rock music. In 2005, an average of one U.S. rock radio station went out of business every week. Every week, a rock station would go out of business. Now, this didn't happen because we all got tired of rock and roll. Hey, I don't like rock and roll anymore, so nobody's going to ever... No, that's not what happened. What happened is there was a fundamental change or a paradigm shift in the delivery of music. It was an iPod. And you think about the way we listen to music. The last century, we would turn on the radio and we'd let someone else select the songs for us. And if we heard a song we liked, we had to wait almost all day for it to get played again. And that whole delivery mechanism changed when you could select the song you want, listen to the song you want, go up to Napster and get the song you want, file sharing. And so all of a sudden, these rock stations, very good businesses, for years, very good businesses, selling advertising, making a lot of money, they started going out of business. And it wasn't because the product wasn't any good. It was because there was a paradigm shift, a fundamental change in the delivery of that content. And so today in real estate, that's what we're seeing. Different ways to get that information out to people. So a paradigm. Know this about paradigms. I got this from Joel Barker. If you've never read anything by Joel Barker, real interesting guy, did some real good videos in the 90s. But so true. Your past success guarantees nothing when a paradigm shifts. It doesn't matter how successful you were doing it the old way. Like the radios, it doesn't matter how good they were at playing the records. The paradigm shifted and they were out of business. The best example that Joel Barker uses is Swiss watchmakers. In 1968, there were 65,000 Swiss watchmakers. The Swiss invented the quartz crystal. They didn't recognize that it was a paradigm shift. They didn't patent it. They offered it for display at the watch fair in 1968, and 5 years later, there were only 15,000 Swiss watchmakers left because Texas Instruments and Seiko, remember those companies? They jumped in and they put the Swiss watchmaking industry on its heels. It was a paradigm shift. So when a paradigm shift, remember your past, why didn't the Swiss realize they had invented a new great thing? They were so good at what they did. They said, this is a tuning fork. How does a tuning fork compare to jewels and crystals and the way a watch works? No, this is a toy. They just didn't realize it, right? So your past success may block you from seeing the future. Look at all these successful real estate brokers that think they know they have the way to sell real estate. Your past success, yeah, I've always done it this way and I've always made money. Your past success may block you from seeing the future. And when a paradigm shifts, everyone goes back to zero. So when there's a paradigm shift, everybody starts over. Doesn't matter that you led the marketplace before the paradigm shift. After the paradigm shift, it's back to zero. And oftentimes people get what's called paradigm paralysis. They get the paradigm shifts and they don't know what to do. So don't get stuck in that mode. So remember this, right? Your wildest dream is not wild enough. Your wildest dream is not wild enough. Hey, there's Bob Goldberg again. And of course, Bob Goldberg's much older than the last picture we saw of Bob. And Bob is the new CEO of the National Association of Realtors. And he sees a paradigm shift coming. And he's instituted a number of programs. Bob's been at NAR since '95. And now as the CEO, he's introduced a new program. It's called REACH. And NAR has some success with this, and here's the idea. When new technologies want to get into the real estate space, and we already know everybody wants to get into the real estate space, right? Everybody wants to go there. When they do, most of them don't know anything about the real estate industry. They don't know how it works, but they have the technologies. So what do? They seek out consultants. They seek out people like me, like my business partner, John Riley, like other people we know in the industry, consultants, people who can teach them about the real estate industry, can introduce them to people in the real estate industry, and maybe can influence people about the idea that they have. Now, I'm pretty good at that, but NAR is much better at that than me. NAR knows lots more people than me. NAR knows what the members are looking for. They do surveys. So NAR said, we're going to set up an accelerator program. We're going to find the top technology companies that want to come into the real estate space. And then we're going to help them come into the real estate space. Now, they're going to have to pay to be part of this program. They're going to have to pay us money and stock in the company. Now remember, 8 out of 10 companies typically are successful, so NAR already has made money. It made about $50 million with Realtor.com initially. With DocuSign, NAR has made a lot of money with DocuSign and still owns a lot of stock in DocuSign. NAR owns a number of companies. I think I have the slide on that. So you can see the REACH companies that NAR now owns, pieces of all of these different companies. And these companies come to NAR and they say, we're willing to give you cash and we're willing to give you equity, but we want your help and your expertise, and we want to meet the people who would end up buying these products, and we'll even meet some people. We might even put them on the board of directors. And the chance of these companies being successful is much enhanced by dealing with the NAR accelerator program. And NAR benefits because NAR is going to earn equity in all these companies, and NAR earns a fee for this, and the technologies that are created will align with the needs of the members because NAR is out there asking and knows what the member needs. This is genius. This is, for me, one of the greatest programs that they've ever created in NAR, and I'm hoping they're very successful with it because I can see enough revenues coming out of something like this at some point in time where you don't need to pay dues anymore, that the revenues generated from the ownership interest in these assets will be enough, and that's looking to the future. I mean, again, this is a great program created for the benefits of realtors. If you're interested, they're looking for realtors to participate in the Insight Panel. Go to nar-reach.com/realtors and get involved. You'll also start to see new technologies as they come out, so you'll get a head start on your competitors in seeing what types of products NAR is actually vetting and accepting into the REACH program. So something well worth looking into. Now, as we look to the future, I look for things like this. I look for the listing side to disappear. No more listing side. Why do you need a listing side? You put it on the internet, everybody can find it. You can list for free. I see brokers, I already see Redfin offering 1%. That's pretty close. That's 1 in 3, that's 4. And so what if they listed for free just to get the other side? List for free, buy for 3. And so now we might see a model where the listing side disappears. And that means that the day of the buyer's agent has arrived. Because the true values, if I were selling real estate today, I would be spending a lot of time learning about working with buyers. Because list to last is probably obsolete moving into the future. So I made this slide up just for fun. What if Google decided they want to get into the real estate? Now they decided once and they backed out. But what if going forward, Google decides, you know what? We would like to get into real estate. Just because we know people are going to buy stuff at Home Depot, buy stuff at Lowe's, we can sell ads. So what if Zillow put a statement on, you know that when you go to the Zillow search page, there's hardly anything there. It's all white space. So there's plenty of room for ads. So what if they put right here something like, sell your home without paying a commission? Click here. How many people go to Google every day? How long do you think it would take? Oh, Google could do a couple Super Bowl ads as well. How long do you think it would take before people started to believe they could list their properties for free? And remember, people will do a lot of stuff if it's free. And so I don't think it would take more than a couple months before everything that was for sale in the United States would be on Google. And then people say, yeah, but the MLS, they're going to take it down when it sells and if there's a change. Well, don't you think platforms can figure that out? Don't you think if an offer gets accepted, the platform will know that there's an offer pending and can change it on the search site? Don't you think if it closes escrow that gets recorded and that gets picked up by the platform, and so we can eliminate it from the database? So all the things that we used to require realtors to do and we fine them if they don't do it, that stuff's all going to be done technologically. And so the things that we now say are the pillars of the multiple listing service might go away, and the listing side could go. If Zillow did this, do you think this would be disruptive? Excuse me, Zillow. Freudian slip. If Google did this, right, do you think people would rush? I think a lot of consumers would want to see, and I think a lot of realtors would do it. I think a lot of consumers would say to a realtor, don't forget to put my site on Google. Future SOC, lower. So if you're not ready for lower commissions, get ready for lower commissions. If you see Purple Bricks out there saying, and if you got to watch their commercials because they actually say you're a fool if you pay full commission. They just don't say, well, our competitors, they say, you're a fool. They don't say it that way, but that's how you feel afterwards if you watch their commercials. So there's lots of advertising and exposure telling people they're foolish to pay what you're asking. How do you get around that? You need to develop your compelling argument. But we think that commissions are, just because of all of the promotion, commissions are going to go down. You're going to have to sell more product to make the same amount of money. Now remember, you got iBuyers, so you're not going to have as much product to sell. Buyer contracts become standing operating procedure. This is what's going to happen in the future. There aren't going to be any listing agreements. People are going to go to Google. They're going to put them up there for nothing. That's why, but they're going to need somebody to help them with the transaction. Maybe the buyer agent. Brokers build repositories and networks of behavioral data and monetize the data. So this is something that brokers are starting to look at. Keller Williams is kind of looking at this. And if you're listening to Gary Keller lately and the things he's talking about and the platform, and it doesn't matter what you think of Keller Williams or Gary Keller, I'm telling you that's the right idea. He's talking about the value of the data. That's powerful and that's right, because if you're a broker and you've got the listings on your site and consumers are coming to your site and you're monitoring and measuring where they're going, you're doing the same thing that some of these portals are doing. You're gaining all this data, and what's the value of the data? Remember, it's going to help you determine nuance. It's going to be part of the artificial intelligence and all the things that you're working with to make your services better. So in the future, yeah, I think lower commissions, no doubt, lower commissions on the way. Buyer contracts will help save you, and brokers look at, on your own sites, building repositories and networks of behavioral data, because that data, at some point, somebody's going to want to pay for it. Cost of MLS, this is in the future. I believe that the MLS data is so valuable, and somebody's going to figure that out, and they're going to be able to use that data, not the personally identifiable kind of data, but just the behavioral data around where people search. That's going to become so valuable that MLSs are going to be able to sell that, and that's going to offset the cost of MLS for realtors. So right now we've got an army of realtors that go out and collect all this data. They don't charge anything. That's free. They put it on to the MLS. It gets distributed, and all the other companies make lots of money on that data that the free army of realtors created. And that data, people will realize and are starting to realize, is very valuable, even the older stuff. At some point, we're going to see that data pays for the collection of the data. And that means you shouldn't have to pay for that data as a member of your MLS, as a subscriber or a participant. So no matter what here, you need to understand data, understand its value, master a CRM application, and create an online presence. And don't guess at this stuff. Go out and do the research. Now, in 1968, I was a freshman, a plebe at the United States Naval Academy, and this was, actually my degree is in naval science and management, right? So if you meet somebody from the Naval Academy, you know that their degree is actually in naval science, right? How could there be? You know how to tie ropes. No, there's actually naval science, right? And so this is volume 3 of our naval science book. We had these books, and I had a naval science class. And in that naval science class in 1968, I learned about something called the DX concept. DX, that was the new destroyers that were going to come out. A brand new type of destroyer. The World War II destroyers of 68. We're going to replace the entire fleet of destroyers. It was going to be a paradigm shift. I didn't know the word paradigm back then, but it was going to be a paradigm shift. And they talked in this book, talked about the DX concept and the type of propulsion. And then I graduated in 1972, and in 1972 I was assigned to that ship in the bottom, the USS Mount Vernon LSD-39. It was brand new. It had just been commissioned. It sailed around the Horn to San Diego, and I met her in San Diego in the summer of 1972. Brand new. Steam driven. Do you know that most Navy ships were steam driven? Matter of fact, our aircraft carriers are steam driven. Even our ones that are where the heat is generated by nuclear fission, the heat turns water into steam to run the ship. They're all steam engines. And so that was the way ships ran. That 139, that's a steam engine, right? And as I went on that ship, it's a steam engine. In 1976, 4 years later, I was assigned to 967, which was a Spruance-class destroyer. I was assigned to the 5th ship of the class. This ship is not a steam ship. It's driven by LM-2500 gas turbine engines, the same engines on a DC-10 aircraft, adapted for marine. So all of a sudden, instead of a steam engine running a ship, you had gas turbine engines. Instead of the carrier having to stop with the engine order telegraph and the guy down below, and he has to close the head throttle, and he has to... No, on this ship, you have it on the bridge, you have a control. You just make the engine go faster or make it go slower. It's that quick. And you had variable pitch props. And so on the first ship, you didn't have variable pitch props. That meant to stop the ship, you had to stop the propellers from going one way. Then you had to make them go. It took time. On this ship, the propellers always go the same way. You push a button, it changes the pitch. And so instead of driving the ship forward, the pitch reverses and it pulls the ship backwards. Paradigm shift took place in what? I learned about it in 68. You got to know that in 1968 they were already working on the plans for this. In 1972 I was here. This thing was about ready to pop out, but we didn't know it. And then in 1976 I get assigned to it. So here's the thing, here's the point. All the new things that are going to affect you, the paradigm shifts that are coming down, they're already in play. People have already thought of this. They're already in play. We just haven't heard about it yet. The question is, do you want a future by default or a future by design? A future by default is the future that you have because you didn't die last night. A future by design is the future that you create for yourself. But to create a future by design, you have to step into the future. Now, that's kind of odd. How do you step into the future? It's easy to understand if you kind of look at a timeline, and where I stand today is the present. Where I stand today, on my right is the past, and on the left is my future. If I look to my past and I think about it, I can see all of the things that I had to do, that I did, to get to where I am today. It's easy for me to look back, 20/20 hindsight. I can say, I did that, I did that, I did that, I did that. I didn't have to do that one. I didn't have to do that one. I did that, I did that. And I'm here. How do you plan for the future? You actually have to step into the future. You actually have to step out into the future. And when you're in the future, you can turn around and look at the present. And you can see from that future position, what are the things you're going to have to do to get to the future. So how do you step into the future? The things that we've talked about are the things that are going to help you figure out the future. Going out and looking at the competition, looking at the websites, going deep into them and reading and visiting us on Realtown and at Realty Times so we can help you design your future by getting a picture of what that future looks like. So what consumers are looking for today, and you need to remember this, people want things fast. People will pay more if they get it fast. So we're back to the liquidity in real estate, right? People will sell it for less if they can get their money out quick. Convenience. Now, and it's not for everybody. It doesn't have to be for everybody. People want convenience. People will pay more for convenience. 7-Eleven. Have you ever gone to a 7-Eleven? You notice you pay more. Why? Convenience. People want choice, and choice is driving this. Today, there are so many more choices for real property, so much utility with real property. People want value added. Value added is when you give people more than they expect. So what can you do to give people more than they expect? I believe nuanced selling is value added, right? If you can determine nuance and determine things that other people can't determine, that's a value add. Your capability to determine human needs and desires is a value add. Discounts. People want discounts. That's why Purple Brick says, do you suffer from commisery? That's paying too much commission, right? That's why Redfin says list for as low as 1%, because they know people want discounts. But people also want quality and service. That's why Purple Brick says full service for thousands less. See, they're smart. They got this figured out. And people want information because, as Alvin Toffler said, information is the currency of the 21st century. And so we're back to change. Is the real estate industry too big to sink? Is it too complex? Are there too many things going on so that it will never sink? Well, I can tell you this, aircraft carriers can be sunk. It's not easy, but there probably are ways to do it. But what about the real estate industry? And more importantly, what about your position in the real estate industry and what you're doing in the real estate industry? Can you be sunk? And that's really a question that only you can answer.